Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the final reckoning of Highlander for us for now, until the Henry Cavill movie comes out. And then we'll talk about that. That'll be excellent. That comes out, I don't know, this year, next year, some point. Anyway, so season 2 of the 90s cartoon, I read somewhere that it was a French cartoon, so I guess maybe it was translated into English later on or something. I don't know. I'm not looking too deeply into it, but just yeah, heads up. I don't necessarily believe what I read. I don't believe most of what I read, to be honest, unless like suits what I'm actually thinking at the time or like an argument I'm making. But I don't know. It just doesn't set right with me. So Gaumont is the company that made this. They also the ones who made the TV series, and I think they were involved in the first Highlander movie and maybe a couple of the ones with Adrian Paul, but I don't know if they were involved. Who's Duncan? And I don't know if they're involved in the. They might not have been with the first one. They might have like picked it up. I don't know. They were involved in a lot of stuff. They're like this huge French production company, at least in like the 90s and 80s. And maybe in the 2000s. Again, I don't know. I'm not going to look this shit up. Just ask Gemini. But the point being is, so maybe that's why the source I read just assumed that, you know, they didn't do their research correctly and assumed this was like a French cartoon and then it got translated over to English. I don't know. Anyway, all that to say, we begin with a very complicated episode. So season 2 opens up and it pretty much just picks off where season 1 ended, which is not like a continuing storyline per se. It's just like Quentin and Ramirez and Clyde, something like that. Anyway, the sister are just looking for generators so that Quentin can get more powers and stuff. And so we just pick up with that. Well, we pick up with Quentin having like nightmares about Corton and like freaking out about it. So he grabs Clyde and they both like nope the fuck out of there and head away for some reason without telling Ramirez. And then we kind of jump over to Corton. And Cortan's whole thing right now is that he's also having dreams, but his dreams are about his magic sword and how he loves his sword and how he first got his sword. And there's like a scene with him in a top hat. And I was like, this is fucking awesome. And like, the fuck is, what is this? Oh, God. He's still got like his white face too. And it's like stupid looking fucking face. I'm sorry. It's so good. I really like this. If you can't tell, it's very entertaining. So we also learned that Malone, the Clockwork Orange guy, is he is like needed. So he is like the key that unlocks Cortan's sword or something. So he's essential to getting access to it. Anyway, so on his way. At some point, Ramirez realizes Quentin's gone, and he goes after him back to Morganda, or whatever this fucking place is called. And anyway, so Quentin ends up being assaulted by some, like, banditos, and he fights them, and then the hunters show up, and he, like, saves them, and he goes to, like, their underground facility, and their leader's there, like, fuck this guy, let's kill him, and yada yada. And then he's like, oh, hey, it's you. I don't remember her name. Doris. Hey, Doris, what's up? You remember me? We're both whatever clan he's from. Donegan? God, what was it? Donegan? Anyway, so they're both from the same clan. And so she's like, oh, so you betrayed the clan. He's like, no, I'm doing this thing, blah, blah, blah. And then, like, for some reason, Malone's there. And so he grabs Malone and takes him. Or they're like going in to like steal stuff from Morganda or something. Anyway, he gets a hold of Malone. He takes Malone. He gets the sword, and he's like, got it. He got a sword. Awesome. I'm doing great. And so he starts heading out. And Ramirez has like showed up by this point, and then he's gotten to a little like fight-opotamus with Corton, and it looks like he's losing or whatever. He's about to be beat, and then Quentin's like, hey, you cut that shit out, or I'm gonna destroy your sword. I'm gonna throw it into like this pool of like molten goo or whatever. And he's like, fine. So Corton, being the honorable villain that he is, he lets Ramirez go, and then Quentin throws the sword in the molten lead anyway, and he's like, haha, it sucks to be you. And it's like, why are the McClouds all oathbreakers? I don't understand. Like, what is this theme? Like, you are not heroic by like any stretch of the imagination. And Adrian Paul is like sometimes heroic, but sometimes he's just an oathbreaker. Like, the fuck. Anyway, so Corton, don't worry, everybody. The honorable person in this situation, Corton, is able to like yank his sword out before it gets like melted, I guess, and then he puts it back where it belongs, and he gives Malone like a dirty look, and that wraps up episode 1. Episode 2 here is another kind of hilarious episode in that, so we have the nuclear bomb episode from previously, and for some reason Quentin needs to have the information about nuclear bombs. It wasn't even energy. It wasn't even like, oh, nuclear power can do good and bad things, because this is like the 90s in France or whatever. So they hate it, even though France is completely powered by nuclear reactors, whatever. Anyway, it's like some of this environmental bullshit that was like all Captain Planet was like 100% trying to, propagandize kids. But a lot of this stuff had kind of like weird propaganda stuff, because the people writing it are all lunatics. Even though they wrote some good stuff sometimes. I mean, I guess that's par and parcel. Anyway, so now it's time to go find out about satellites. That's right, satellites. And the satellite non-jetterer, we find out, he's just an immortal who knows everything about satellites and shit. His name is Shepard, and he never joined the jetterer like cause to like save the world and like pass all the future knowledge on, because he feels guilty because it's like something he did supposedly caused the great catastrophe that like ended the world. And so because he holds all this shame and guilt, he's just like hid it away. So Quentin and Ramirez like show up to get the information, and the guy's like, no, I refuse, get out of here. And then Corton, of course, because he's the Saturday morning cartoon villain, he shows up around the same time to like get the information so he can be an asshole and have satellite stuff. And then Shepard, like they have like him and Cortan go back and forth, or they have a little thing back and forth, and then Quentin's like off doing something, and then Shepard has to like track down Quentin because he's like, no, you know what, I'm gonna do the honorable thing and like recover from like my evil ways or whatever, and allow him to have like all the quickening yumminess. So he tracks down Quentin finally, and he like kneels down, he's like, take my head. And Ramirez is like, get the fuck up. And what the fuck are you doing? And he's like, he needs my quickening, there's only one way to do it, he has to cut off my head. And then Ramirez is like, if you just became a jetterer, then you could just hand it off to him by using your sword. And I was like, oh, they never explained this before. Are you fucking kidding me? That's why they're jetterers. It's like, oh my gosh, like got through like a whole season of this shit, like 14 episodes, including the first 15 if you count the first 2 episodes of season 2. And they never explain like the point, like what they're just like they made a pledge, and I'm like, and then at this juncture I'm like, holy shit, maybe this was French, and they translated it very poorly into English because they never fucking explained why this. It was just like they made a pledge to not kill each other anymore. That's why they're jetterers, and I was like, I don't understand. Okay, sure, why not? But no, okay, so being a jetterer is like a special thing using like immortal magic, which we know exists like. It constantly comes up in every iteration of this. Hopefully it comes up in the Henry Cavill version. God, please help it come up in the Henry Cavill version. I love Immortal Magic. It makes no fucking sense, and it's just like whenever they feel like it. It's so good. Anyway, and so he makes his promise with Ramirez to hold knowledge or whatever, become a jetterer, and because of that, he's able to pass his knowledge on to Quentin, and then Quentin's able to use this new knowledge he's gained to. Actually, I don't think he does anything. Hold on, let me check my notes. If I remember correctly, he passes he just cuts the bridge that Corton's on, and so he can't get across. And then Shepard is the one who gets on his system and like destroys it, including like the satellite, I want to say, so that Corton can never get this information. And in my head, I'm like, and neither can Quentin. Should have just done that in the first place. Like, who cares? Like, all right, whatever. There's probably other satellite relay stations around somewhere, I guess. Probably. All right, episode 3 is kind of like a City of Lost Children episode. It's good. About what occurs here is that Quentin and Clyde are just like playing around and fucking around and stuff. Ramirez gives him a hard time, and he's like, I want more freedom. I want to be able to do what the fuck I want. I want to be able to just chill. And it's like, bro, you're like an adult, whatever. And Ramirez is like, oh yeah, I'll show you what that's like. And so he takes him to Paris, it seems, because there's like, I think I saw the Arc de Triomphe, and I was like, oh, I guess that would make sense. I mean, if we're looking at this, if we are taking this more seriously than the writers of the show, there's the whole thing about the Scottish Highlands and the Highlanders being nomads and stuff from like the beginning of the first season. So, okay, so they're like in the British Isles, right? Then at some point they like get on a ship and sail far away from Cortan, right? Which I guess would be the mainland. But then Cortan's like around anyway. So I was like, I don't know. Maybe they went to Ireland, and then Cortan's on the mainland. And then he said, that's the thing. They never like crossed the water again. So I got to assume everybody's just in mainland Europe, and maybe these guys sailed over to England or something. I don't know. That's me putting a lot more effort into like trying to figure out exactly geographically where this takes place than the writers ever did, because they don't. None of this shit comes up, and they just have like random landmarks sometimes, like the fucking Statue of Liberty, and then like 5 minutes later they're like at the Arc de Triomphe, and it's like that is a long journey if you're just like sailing. It's like there's one sailboat that they found in all the universe that's left. Anyway. So he gets there, and we meet like the, what do they call them in that show? Like the jets and the fucking, what was it called in that? Like the I don't remember. Anyway, they're called like the Paleys and like, what was the other gang? The Paleys, and I think they had some real gay name. Oh, that's right. It was Rainbow. So they had they had the symbol of Jesus Christ covenant with Noah that he would never flood the earth again. So the symbolization of Jesus Christ is one gang, and then the Paleys because they're pale, I guess, and they have like white faces. I think that's right. Them, and then the Rainbows, they wear like colorful outfits or whatever. So Quentin shows up. They're like, the gangs are like fighting each other. He's like, no, let's make peace, not war. And then he works really hard to be diplomatic and get everyone to get along. But unfortunately, the Paleys are like real double-cross and backstabbers. And so they're all planning on like backstabbing and calling, like one of them goes and gets like Arak to come over here. And he's like, oh, hey, we got the Highlander and we got all these other guys and we want you to help defeat these guys. And I'm like, sounds good. Meanwhile, Ramirez kind of figures out what's going on. And so he jumps one of these hunters as they're showing up and takes over. And he finally convinces the Paleys that like Cortan and Arak as his like right hand are not going to just like let them run the city. They're going to like take everybody over and make them slaves or whatever. And so at some point, I think the animal gets like kidnapped too. It didn't seem like that big of a deal, so I don't really remember what happened with that whole situation. But by the end of the episode, what's important is that even though there's like all these schemes and back dealings and whatnot, like the two gangs, the Hatchford and McCoys decide that they're going to team up to fight the hunters. And they win because of Quentin and his like diplomaticness and fighting paralysis and all that good stuff. So hooray, the gang of children beat like a well-armed military, which I guess they have no one to fight against. So they're just like a bunch of 19-year-old homies who just want to drink and smoke pot. But, you know, mom made them go join the military and get out of her fucking house. Oh, goodness. Episode 4 deals a lot with books, namely that books are outlawed by Cortan, and so he wants them all destroyed, and then he makes like a huge deal about how they're dangerous, but like most people don't even know what a book is. And I like think back to like multiple episodes in the first season where there were like books lying around or people using books or like a whole library of books that like people just not seem to like, give too many fucks about at all. But well, you know, whatever. So, and I bring that up because there's like a fucking scene in this. Anyway, okay, so books are important, yada, yada, yada. We find out, or like Cortan finds out that there's some city that was started by like a rogue or an exiled like hunter named like 451, I want to say. And so he wants it stamped out. So he sends Arak over there to do something about it. And he goes over there, and then it's like they have a bunch of books, and everyone's like scared of books. Like literally at some point, like Clyde gets kidnapped at some point, and then there's like she and like another guy, part of this village, when they're like over there doing stuff, like found like a secret library or forbidden library or something. And you know, Arak's like, what's down there? And they're like, we don't know, books maybe. And they're like, books. And everyone's like, oh, books are so dangerous. Whisper, 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 whisper. And this goes on for like 5 fucking minutes. Like, I was like, what the fuck? And then he's like, all right, man, get in there. And his men are like looking back and forth at each other. And he's like, how dare you disobey an order? And they're like, sir, books are dangerous. We don't want to go in there. And he's like, what? And they're like, why don't you go in there? And he's like, you get in there right now. Because he's scared of books too. They're just scared of books. Like books are going to leap out at him like a fucking cobra, like nab onto their neck and eat their tiny feetsies and whatnot. Like the fuck. It's like, what the? And I'm like, Arak, you've literally seen books before, like in a previous episode. Like the fuck are you so scared of? Anyway, so he eventually decides they're just going to burn the whole fucking thing down. The whole village, the whole library, the whole thing. They're going to bash in there and just burn them all. Burn the books. And Ramirez takes like particular issue with this because he loves books, and then something about like the Spanish Inquisition or something comes up and how they burned books, and nothing about the Nazis, I guess, which is, you know, this day and age in like 2026, that would be like the whole episode would be about how bad like Trump is because not because he burned books, because people are fucking nuts. Like, and he's obviously, if you disagree with me, you're a Nazi. What does that mean? Like, everyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi. I love it. I wish that was a real book. Anyway, so Ramirez is going to stop that by like using bombs to blow something up, blow up the entrance, seal the books up or something, so the knowledge can be dug up someday and isn't ruined. Something like that. Anyway, so, but then he finds out that like Quentin's in there fighting, like Clyde tells him or something. So then like shenanigans ensue, and we have to like wait to like blow up the entrance to the library until Quentin and Arak and everybody escapes. So everyone escapes safely. Don't worry, no one dies because it's a fucking 90s Saturday morning cartoon. And then the books are saved and everyone's like, hooray! And Arak like heads back to Cortan with like his head held in shame, as he does most of the time. And like, how the fuck does this dude still have a job? Especially we know for like by canon in this show, there's like other generals that could be doing shit, but nope. It's got to be this guy for some fucking reason, even though he's terrible. And even when it was like good time to get rid of him, right? Corton told Marlowe that like, no, I got to keep him around, like something. And it was like, that was really hand wavy because you probably could do much better if you just like grabbed a random hunter and had them be in charge instead. But oh well, here we go. Our next journey is into under the water. That's right. So Clyde and Quentin and everybody, they're like riding on a raft and trying to escape from Arak or something. And then Clyde gets tipped over into the water, and then she gets nabbed up by these guys, and Quentin's freaking out, and like they're still getting chased, and eventually they, like, Quentin and Ramirez, like, decide they're gonna go underwater, and so they go underwater and they meet these guys, and it's like, oh, thank goodness Clyde is safe. And Clyde is safe because she's in the city of Orain, who's a jetterer of like marine biology or something. Anyway, they chit-chat, they talk about their underwater city, how they're hiding out from Corton from here. Corton, meanwhile, is like, aha, I found her, because Arak's like, they went underwater and they never came back out, and he's like, what? It must be her rage, she must be down there, I'm gonna go fight her right now and take care of this business. So he gets like he gets like an armada. Like he gets this huge crew of like ships with like tanks in them and everything, and he's like, time to go. And so they go make it like an invasion. Meanwhile, Quentin gets the quickening about marine life from Orain, and then they come under attack, and it's, oh no, attack, and like, oh no, our city's destroyed, we can escape, but what are we going to do? And then Quentin is like, no, we're like an amoeba, we can just like detach, and they'll blow that part up, and we'll just like float with the current. And they're like, oh, that's genius. So they start doing that, and then they like send out some bombs or something, because a bunch of the transport ships and underwater attacker thingies that Corton has are destroyed. And then Corton's like standing in the water without any kind of like wetsuit or anything, and he's like looking around, he's like, aha, I have destroyed them. But nope, he hasn't. They Orain and her people are able to like float away and have their like underwater habitat and be at peace and away from Corton forever. And then everyone gives like Quentin a high five. Next up, we got Quentin, Ramirez, and Clyde. They all end up in some sort of like labyrinth or something, and they're being chased by Corton's people or Arak or whatever. And they go through this thing, and eventually they get they think they've escaped, and they end up in a prison. Oh no! And Corton's like, aha, I got him, and he like seals it up. And then him and Arak talk about the people, the prisoners of this place, and how they're going to defeat Ramirez and Quentin for him, because this is like a prison, and the prison's been around for like 1,000 years, and the people live here are descendants of the prison. And this is directly where Corton gets his homies from, like his goons and his army and stuff. So he gets these prisoners, and the prisoners worship almighty like K, and K is just mechanical Cortans he has like out and about. And so Quentin sees this, meets a guy who's like, 0675321, but he calls him like Connor instead. He's like, numbers are hard to remember because I'm an idiot, so I'm just gonna give you a name, that'll be easier. And then he gives him a name, and then he starts working with the people to try to escape, and like, he can't escape, there's like an electric fence. And so he takes off his shirt for reasons, and then grabs electric fence and shorts it out because he's immortal and he can't die, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, you did it. And then we find out that Arak he was like raised here. This is how he came to prominence. And so he has like a certain affinity for these people. But Cortan's like, kill them all. And Arak's like, but sir. And he's like, I said kill them all. And so that causes problems for Corton later, because Corton releases like these giant mechanical ants to like invade the people and kill them all. And so they're running away, and there's like women with like skin, like string bikinis and babies and shit that all have like numbers on their heads or whatever. And they're all running to try to get away to escape this like monstrosity thing that's going to happen. And Corton and Arak like leave via the only like exit out of this prison. But then Arak looks back and puts like a rock in the doorway as it's about to close so that it seals up. So it doesn't seal up. And that way Ramirez and Quentin are able to like lead the people and all the women and children out of there, and they finally see freedom, and there's like mountains and shit, and they're like, wow, this is beautiful, this is like heaven, thank you so much, you did so good. And then Clyde's like, Quentin, don't forget. And Quentin's like, oh yeah, no more numbers, you give each other names, you're not slaves anymore. And they're like, hooray. And so Arak's like a more complicated character than we initially thought. That's nice. We start off episode 7 with Ramirez acting very odd. Like, he's like, all right, here's your sword, here's the McLeod sword, go kill Corton. And Quentin is actually like, what? I don't think I'm ready to kill. What are you talking about? You don't ever act like this. And then Clyde's like, yeah, Ramirez, you're acting funny. And then he like kind of slaps her or something. And it's like, that's weird. And so they go back and forth. They go to like the place where the jetterers like made their oaths or whatever. And they're like, yada, yada, yada. And it's just the whole time Quentin's like, I don't know, and Clyde's like, I don't know, this seems very sketchy and whatnot. And it is sketchy because dun-dun-dun, it's not actually Ramirez. Ramirez is somehow off-screen got captured or whatever in Magonda, and he is able to finally like escape after some shenanigans. Once he escapes, he grabs scientist guy, Acapelios or whatever his name is, and utilizes him to figure out what's going on. So Cortan set up a... So also this whole time while Ramirez is like, oh, you're going to fight, blah, blah, blah. He's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go talk to Cortan and set this up so it's an honorable fight. Because, if I set it up, it'll be an honorable fight or some nonsense or whatever. And so he heads off to do that. He's going back and forth. And so we learn, as part of this whole thing, even though Quentin's kind of like not figured it out all the way yet, that, yeah, this guy's definitely like a doppelganger or like he's like a guy wearing like a mask, but it's like a very advanced mask because it's just like Ramirez. And so Ramirez is able to finally like escape and catch up with Quentin, and then they have like this like the Spider-Man thing meme where it's like all the Spider-Men are pointing at each other. It's like they have one of those moments with Ramirez being like, he's the doppelganger, and like, no, he's the doppelganger, he's the they don't call him doppelgangers, he's the faker. And so they go back and forth about that for a little bit, and then something about, I'm trying to remember exactly what Ramirez says that convinces Quentin that he's the real one. Something about like, you're not ready to fight Cortan or something. And then Quentin's like, you are the fake because you said I am ready. And Ramirez would never say that. And it's like, wah. Anyway, so they're on like a bridge. Cortan's like on the other side of the bridge. And then instead of like coming across, he like pushes the fake guy out there and like cuts the bridge, so the guy like falls to his death, or like falls, it's a cartoon, so he like grabs onto the edge of the cliff or the bridge or whatever. And then Cortan's like, this will be the last time you cut a bridge away from me. Next time we're actually gonna fight on this freaking bridge. And which is funny. It's funny because I think this is like the second or third time Quinn's like escaped from Cortan by like cutting bridges. Like, it's like very silly. But yeah, that's it. And then they flee and they have a nice little chat and whatnot. So we start episode 8 off with a raid into Morgunda, and these guys who are like raiding and they're doing all this stuff. At some point, one of them's like, this is for Orion. Orion wants to challenge Cortan to like a battle on this day at this time or something and whatnot. And so Cortan's like, I'll be there. I'll kill that mother effer. I'm tired of his like raids and his nonsense and bullcrap and whatnot. Meanwhile, Quentin and Ramirez are talking about space, or no, they're talking about, what's it called? It's not astronomy. They're talking about astronomy and space and the movements of the stars and all that bullcrap. And then it's time to go to what was his name? It was like Cormair. Is it Cormair? Anyway, doesn't matter. So they're gonna go to like see Coleman. Sure, Coleman. Let's just say Coleman. So he's gonna go see Coleman because he's the one who can do the astronomy stuff. And they head out there, and then they run into some of these like Orion's goons, and they fight them. And then Orion shows up, and it's dun-da-da. Orion is actually Coleman. That's right. He has forsaken his Jeterer oath. He refuses to give the quickening to Quentin. And he is going to fight Cortan. And then Ramirez is like, gets super mad. They like escape from like the boundings there. And Orion tells Quentin that if he wants to fight him, he has to meet him at the exact same time and place that he's going to meet Cortan, right? And then Ramirez and Quentin go back and forth about this. And then at some point, they end up going to like this tree, which Ramirez calls like the magic tree or the tree of life. Oh, it's a tree of like knowledge of good and evil from like the Garden of Eden. I think he just calls it the tree of knowledge. And there, buried underneath is his armor. And then we get like a little flashback of when, because like he's the Jeterer of like vengeance or something, which is funny because the anime is like search for vengeance, right? But like if any Jeterer breaks their oath, it is his job to like bring them back or to like destroy them. So I guess he can gather the quickening and then give it to Quentin when when he's finally ready to stop being a Jeterer, I would assume. All right, so he goes. So we see him like fighting Cortan on like a train. And almost beating Cortan, but then Cortan like slides off. Oh wait, did that happen in a different episode? Wait a second. I don't know. I watched all 4 of these like back to back, or the last 4, like 5, 6, 7, 8. Anyway, that happened at some point, so that was cool. I don't remember if that was this episode or not. Anyway, but what I do remember is that Cortan, I think it was this episode, because Cortan, we see like a flashback of Cortan killing Connor again, and then we see Ramirez like donning his like magic armor and chasing Cortan down. And this is like, he failed, but he's not going to fail getting Coleman and getting his quickening or whatever. He's not going to allow Cortan to get it. And he digs up some pretty like badass armor from underneath this tree, and that's the whole reason they came to the tree in the first place. And then he heads off to fight, right? But at some juncture, he's going and he's like fighting Orion, as he calls himself now. And we learn that Orion is actually blind. And they like chit-chat about that, and finally Ramirez convinces Orion to like take the General Oath again or something, and to give the power of astronomy to Quentin. And so they find out it has something to do with like Cortan showing up, and he's like, ruh-roh. And so he finally agrees. So he gives Quentin his quickening, and then he stays behind to fight Cortan. And Ramirez and Quentin like right out of there. And then Ramirez is like, oh, he's gonna die. And Quentin's like, he's not gonna die. He's blind, but like there's gonna be a solar eclipse, and so it'll be dark, and it'll be dark for him and Cortan. And then Ramirez is like, oh, that might have worked. That's why he like was so specific about that time frame, right? But when he gave Quentin his quickening, he gave him like all his powers, right? So then he doesn't have the ability to like defeat Cortan, and we get like a little battle between Cortan and Orion, and he loses. So, you know, it's kind of sad, I guess. Episode 9 here involves the hurricanes, and both the literal hurricane and the group who calls themselves the Hurricanes. So we start off, there's like a big storm. Clyde almost falls off a cliff, but is saved at the last second by, I think his name's Gruel, the little mascot character. Anyway, and then they're hiding away and stuff, and then Ramirez spots the hunters coming around this area, and you know, and then he kind of puts two and two together, and he's like, oh no, they're going after the hurricanes. And Quentin is like, the fuck are you talking about? And he's like, well, we must help them immediately. And he's like, are they jitterers? And he's like, sorta yes, sorta no. And he's like, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? Anyway, so Ramirez is like, well, before the jitterers became the jitterers, these people like transformed themselves into not humans or something, and they gather like the energy from like hurricanes, and that's as far as we get. So they're like blue-skinned people who, you know, they live underground in this like fortress where they power with like they have like this battery thing, and so when there's like a hurricane or like strong winds of some kind, they go up and they use this device to like gather the static energy, I think is what it is, like the wind pushing against the turbines or whatever, in this large battery looking thing that looks almost like a litter, that like an altar inside a litter. And they take that down to their underground and they plug it in to like their system, and then they get lights, and I'm assuming like other mechanical things. We just see the lights as like a representation, right? Like it's a cartoon from the 90s, who cares? But, and so Ramirez and Quentin and Clyde show up to like warn them that the hunters are coming, and then these guys are like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, but you're under arrest. And Quentin's able to like escape and then follow them down to like their lair, while Ramirez and Clyde are like in jail. And so Ramirez keeps trying to convince these guys that okay, you got away this time, right? And then you have Arak who like shows up and they're not there, and he, you know, he's like, oh fuck, this is wasting my time. And then he goes back to Cortan, and Cortan's like, you get one more chance, which haha, hilarious. It's like a billion. He's gonna have like, there's like 12 more episodes of this. There's like plenty of more chances for him to fail. So then we see their little light show. Quentin goes to like rescue Ramirez and Clyde while they're like in an audience chamber talking to like the head of the Hurricanes, and then he gets like electroshocked, and everyone's like, no, except Ramirez, who's like, he's immortal. What the fuck? Clyde, you've seen this guy like die like 5 times now, come on. And she's like, but what if he doesn't get up this time? And Ramirez like rolls his eyes in my head. He doesn't in the show, but so it's just like, oh, okay. Anyway, let's see. So then he wakes up, he frees them, they go out. The hurricane, there's like another hurricane. So there's the initial hurricane, and there's like another hurricane. And so they're going up to get more stuff, and then Arak gets sent back, and then Ramirez is like very concerned and like, no, you can't go back out there. They're gonna, the hunters, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh, okay, blah, blah, blah. And so then they kind of like run up there, and then the hunters like show up and start blasting, and so then Quentin has to like help the leader like get the battery, and then he gets like the cord from the battery, which is already like all charged up with like hurricane energy, and he goes and like throws it. He keeps throwing the cord like at the tanks, and it like overrides the tanks, or like and then you like wackadoo stuff like explode or like flip out in the air, and like it's just like completely wackadoo kind of cartoon fun, to be honest. I was like, badass. And then Arak's like, oh fuck this, and like runs off, and then they get awarded like the swords of Hurricane, which Quentin can't take because he needs to use the Highlander sword, and then Ramirez can't take because he's sworn an oath never to use a sword, even though he's used it like 15 times in like the series. But yeah, so that's the episode. It's pretty good. Episode 10 deals a lot with Malone. And his like backstory, sort of, and how he's like a human key and all that jazz and fun stuff and whatnot. So, I'm just trying to look at something. Okay. Anyway, so with the episode starts off with the Dundees being attacked by Arak and one of them getting captured. Neil is the guy's name. I guess we knew that before, but I don't know. And then the other guy getting injured. So there's like the two major Dundees besides like Quentin and Clyde and their mom that are like the red bearded guys who are like always around and whatnot. Anyway, so one of them, Neil, gets captured. Their guy goes and tracks down Ramirez and Quentin and Clyde and tells them the whole story, and they like do some first aid on him to make sure he doesn't like die or whatever because he's pretty injured. And then Quentin is like, I have to go rescue Neil, so I'm gonna go. And so then Ramirez, Quentin, and Clyde head out where the other guy's just like chilling, I guess. And at the same time, Malone is like fucking around in the sword room like he does. and just like and then just like last episode where Cortan was like, this is it. I've had enough of your bullshit, Arak. If you fail one more time, you're done. And then he fails, and he's in this episode doing his job. And so he tells Malone, he's like, that's it. I've had enough of your bullshit. I'm done with you. Go. I'm going to find somebody to be your successor, and you're going to tell them all the stuff they need to know about being a living key. And then I'm going to put them in like the room of obliviation, which is like this badass looking sci-fi futuristic bullshit like device, which people get into, and it like obliterates their memories or something. It makes them totally loyal to Cortan. All right. So then Malone's like, right, and then he has a memory of this guy that was like the key before him and how he did teach him. We learned that Malone used to be like an actor, and that he went through the thing of oblivion, and now he's the human key. But he doesn't want to die, and so he uses some of his like wandering around in the depths of Moganda to like knowledge to get a way out. And then he finds Quentin and Ramirez. He's like, the only chance you have is for me to help you get in there. And like, how do we know we can trust you? And he's like, you can't. Tee-hee. He's like a very like, but I'm like the Joker sort of, but like the cartoon Joker from the Batman, not like the crazy Joker from like the comics. Or even like the comics, but like the old, not even a gangster one, just kind of a more wackadoo one. So from that information, he takes him down below and tells him some stuff, and like, why are you helping us? He's like, oh, something, blah, blah, blah. And then we see Neil getting put into like the seal of oblivion or whatever. And the part of the reason Cortan likes him is because he's so loyal and trustworthy and stuff. So if you can like shatter his memories and make him totally loyal to him, then he has a better personality trait than Malone. And so Malone at some point, like, back to the main group, he traps them in like the part of the sewer and then runs off to turn himself into a rack because Malone needs to die or get turned to stone or something weird to complete the process. I don't know, to make him a living key. And so he goes and turns himself in, and then he's like, wait, before you kill me, I have done the one thing that Arak and like Aklaphilios or whatever have never been able to do. I brought you a Highlander. And then Arak's like, that's bullshit. And then we see Quentin and Ramirez are like, I sense Cortan. And then Cortan's like, no, he has done it. I feel it. And so he's like, where is he, Malone? And he's like, he's in like the amusement sector. And he's like, okay, I'm going to run off. So he runs off, but they're not in the amusement sector. They're actually right above the room of oblivion. So they start doing the obliviation on Neil. And Quentin and Ramirez like hop down, fight everybody, defeat everybody, pull Neil out, throw Arak in there, and then take Malone as like a hostage. And so they're escaping, and Cortan rolls back over. He's like, I'm going to get you now, Highlander. I've been waiting so long for this. You're dead. And he's like, well, if you try to kill me, I'm going to kill this guy. So you better let us go. And he's like, no, I don't give a fuck about that guy. And it's like, you don't give a fuck about him, but you do care about your sword. Without him, you can't get your sword. Checkmate, motherfucker. And then Cortan's like, rah! And then they leave, and then Malone's like, thank you so much. And like, you want to come with us? And he's like, no, I actually have like this. The room of oblivion did like its job correctly, and like I want to serve Cortan with all my heart, soul, and mind. So, no. And it's like, okay, well, adios. And that wraps up that episode. So 11.3 brings me, 11.3. Episode 11 brings me to a point where I have to apologize because I misspoke about a previous episode. I think it was in season 1, episode 8-ish. Anyway, that's the one where Quentin got the information about the nuclear bomb. I said that the Jetter gave him information on like nuclear technology generally, and that is not correct. It was just literally the nuclear bomb. Because in this episode we meet Voltan. Who's Voltan? He's the Jetterer in charge of nuclear energy and nuclear reactors and stuff. So, okay. So they, for some reason, split up the information. I guess it is different information, but I just feel like these Jetterers tend to have like very broad swaths of information. So I don't know why they would have split this up, but they did. Anyway, so they're going to go, Ramirez and Quentin are headed off to meet with Voltan so he can get the information about nuclear energy. And Corton sends Arak to capture him so the Highlander can't get it, but also that he can get the information. So Arak goes to do that. Voltan sends one of his homies. Oops, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, I almost crashed into somebody. So Voltan sends his guy to go tell Quentin and Ramirez what's going down, and then he like pieces out, or he doesn't get pieces out. He gets captured by Arak, taken back to the city. Cortan's like very excited about this, but for some reason he doesn't just go downstairs into the prison area. Oh no, I know what happens. So then we flip over to Moganda, Akalibios, the scientist guy, and Arak get into like a fight about who's in charge of what, and they clearly, again, just re-emphasizes, this is very good writing, because in case you forgot, because there's been you see this like once a week or something on like a Saturday morning cartoon kind of situation, and you're a little kid. So it reminds us that these two do not get along at all, and there's like kind of a power struggle between the two of them to see who's going to be like Cortan's right-hand man. But right now, Akalepios is kind of like in charge of stuff. In fact, he's in charge of the mission for Voltan, so him and Arak get into an argument about that. After they fight, Arak goes off to do the mission. Then, and he grabs Voltan, but somehow it takes Arak like way too long to bring Voltan back, because what happens is Quentin and Ramirez get the information from Voltan's like right-hand guy, and then they, with Voltan's right-hand guy, sneak into the city. The guy, the subordinate to Voltan, goes in because they have a scheme. And, well, first they go meet with, like, the resistance force that exists in the city, and they talk about what they can do and how they need to get Voltan back, but he's, like, in prison. I'm trying to remember the order of events. I think, actually, the assistant goes and takes, like, this sand coin to Corton to say, like, oh, hey, the Highlander wants to challenge you on, like, the hill with, like, the Stonehenge stones or whatever. And then Corton's like, yes! And so he puts he puts the scientist guy like in complete control, like he is like king for the day, essentially. I think that's even the name of the episode. And then he heads off to do that. And so after he leaves, then Arak shows up with Voltan. They put him in like some hydro prison, and we learn that like the whole city is powered with like hydropower, and so the whole thing with like hydraulics and like water pressure and all that stuff is like very important to the city, and they got all these like hydraulic centers and whatnot. But as soon as Arak gets back, him and Aklepilos like get into a big fight, and we find out that Arak's in charge of the hunters who kind of go out, but like the local police force is ran by Aklepilos apparently. And they all have these like, so they're like two big factions. It's not just like nerds and scientists. He has like a whole like faction of like fighters essentially. And so then Ramirez comes up with an idea where he's like, well, we want to break in there and rescue this guy, but we can't because we don't have enough forces in the rebellion and it just want to work. What about the hunters? Oh, the hunters. And then he finds out that the scientist guy's in charge, and him and Arak hate each other. And so the hunters are kind of disgruntled. So he gets a bunch of hunters like completely drunk, and they're using a bunch of like water. And because the bar is like, the hunters bar is like going over their like allocated water, because again, the whole water is like oil essentially, only it's also you drink it. So they're tapping out, and so the Aklepios' men go in there to like shut it down, to be like, hey, you're using too much water, cut it out. And then the drunks and Ramirez and Quentin like kind of spur him on, like start fighting with them, and there's like a big brawl, and then a bunch of them get arrested, and Arak hears about it, and then he goes and bothers Aklepios scientist guy about it, and he's like, go fuck yourself. And Arak's like, no, you go fuck yourself. So he goes and calls like a whole squadron of dudes, and they like invade like the scientist area with like the water chamber. And then Aklepios tries to like flee, but they're like, oh, don't let him flee, crash this thing down. So the elevator stops. And so they do that. And meanwhile, Quentin and Ramirez have like taken some hunter uniforms, and they sneak in there too, and they follow Arak, who's like chasing after Aklepios, whatever, and they end up in like the prison area, and then the water is all busted up and whatnot, so like the prison door opens, they grab Voltan, and they like run out. And at that point, Aklepios notices what's going on, and also at the same time Cortan rolls back in, and he's like, the fuck is happening here? And he like sucker punches Arak, and then he grabs a couple of oops and is like, the fuck? And he's like, oh, something, I saw the Highlander and Voltan and everything. He's like, make it stop. And so that he does something to like reactivate the power and like flood the tunnels, which is like Arak's men have like closed off all exits, and the tunnels, like the sewer is the only way out, but they can flood the sewer. So they do that, and it's like, well, what are they going to do? And so Voltan's like, oh no, let me give you the quickening, and the quickening will create a barrier that will stop the tunnels from flooding or something. And I was like, the fuck? That's what they do, and it works. So it's not even like, oh, they use the quickening and it like blasts a lot of electricity, which we've seen in other versions of like the quickening, of like destroy buildings, destroy like the Eiffel Tower, like blast through stuff, like destroy a whole building, right? But like a whole skyscraper top. But we've never seen it just like create a shield, and so that was pretty funny. But it creates a shield, then it has a back blow that blows up a bunch of shit, and then so Quentin gets the power of like the atomic energy information, and then they get away scot-free, and then they're just like sitting around drinking and chilling, and there's like a whole joke about how the little mascot animal got drunk and now he misses booze. Ha ha! Hilarity. So something I forgot to mention, which is weird, because in the first season, they would call Arak General, but in the last episode, and then it came up again in this episode, episode 12, they keep calling him Major, and like Major is a much lower rank than General. So that's interesting. Maybe he got what do you call it? He got busted down rank for fucking around and failing so much to get the Highlander. I mean, I don't know what else to speak of in that regard, but yeah, I could have sworn they called him General and now they call him Major. Anyway, so this episode, Arak is sieging the Dundies. The Dundies then reveal they have all these like secret weapons and stuff, and it, like you see some girl taking off her like greaves, and she puts them together and makes like a gun or like a crossbow, essentially. And then they like are flipping over things and pulling stuff, and they have all these like ballista and all this like crazy stuff. So they actually hold off Arak's men for the start, but then Arak's like, fuck, we're gonna get him this time. Meanwhile, Ramirez and the rest of the Dundies are talking about how they want to be left alone, obviously. And then they're trying to figure out how to like break the siege and whatnot. And so they come up with this like cockamamie scheme where Quentin's gonna like go and like make a big deal so that Arak can be like, oh, Cortan, Highlanders here, you should bring a bunch of reinforcements and do this, and we'll just crush them. And so that works. But meanwhile, Quentin and Ramirez and a couple other guys are gonna like sneak over to Moganda. So once Cortan takes his whole crew with a sword and all the extra guards and stuff and leaves, and like vamooses over to help Arak while the Dundies just kind of hold on. The Quentin and Ramirez like bust in there. They cause a bunch of like stuff. They dress up funny, and they're able to like essentially solid snake their way into the core chamber room. And they take the scientist guy hostage, and then they set up like a bomb system to blow up like the energy source, which is the hydraulic area. So once they get that whole situation set up, they kidnap the girl. And I haven't mentioned this before, but there's like some kind of hot chick who hangs out with. She's like the scientist guy's like right hand gal. And so they get her, and they're like, hey, you're going to not betray us, and you're going to come with us, or this whole place is going to explode, and you're going to help us convince Cortan to come all the way back over here. And they just have like a candle on a rope, and I'm like, how far away is this Dundee attack? I mean, it can't be that far. They're like traveling, they're like teleporting back and forth instantaneously. I'm like, why the fuck are the Dundees so close to Moganda? Anyway, not important. So she agrees, so they go and they sneak back over to the siege, and the siege is not going well. The Dundees are kind of like on their last little bit of time before they're going to all be dead and whatnot, and that's just with Arak, and then Cortan's like rolling up with reinforcements and stuff as well. And then they drop the girl off, and she like, Lord Cortan, and she tells him what's going on, and then Cortan's like, this fucking Highlander, those rascally kids. I would have had it too, except for those kids. And they all like vamoose, and they break the siege, and they take the entire force and rush back to Moganda, where Cortan is able to stop the improvised explosive device from destroying like his city essentially. And then back with the Dundees, they're all super excited and happy because they're saved, and everything's great. And then Ramirez makes some comment, and then Clyde gives him flips him shit because she's just like, you're just jealous that you didn't know about the Dundees for like hundreds of years, dumbass. It was pretty funny, actually. She didn't say dumbass, obviously, but I was like, okay, you got me. Good stuff. Anyway, but that's episode 12. Episode 12 is interesting. So we start off with Ramirez, Quentin, and Clyde hiding out in like an amusement park while Arak and his men are like burning the whole place to the fucking ground, right? And so then we get like a shot of Cortan like practicing sword fighting against this like funny metal doll with like all these contraptions on it that Malone's piloting, and he's like, all right, time for my final battle, and he heads out. And then we get an argument between Arak and Escapelos and his girlfriend about who did the most work here. Is it the hunters? Is it the bureaucrats? So I guess like this guy's not a scientist. I just mistook. He's actually a bureaucrat. Anyway, so they like argue, and then finally Ramirez, Quentin, and Clyde are trying to like escape and run away, do all this stuff, and they like get into like this parking garage. Wait, hold on. They get into a parking garage. When does this happen? No. Okay, so then they like corner Ramirez, Quentin, and Quentin starts like fighting dudes, and then Ramirez challenges Arak, and then Arak like is fighting him, and then they like grab Clyde, and so Quentin is like, fine, you can, you assholes, don't kill my sister. And so they throw like their swords down, and then Arak goes to like behead Ramirez, and then Escapelos like gets in the way or something happens, and then so what ends up happening is Arak ends up cutting like Escapelos pretty hard, and that's when like Cortan rolls up, and then because they hit Escapelos so hard, Ramirez and Quentin are able to like escape with Clyde. And they go to like this parking garage, and they get in a car, and it's like an old car Ramirez used to own, or like he used to own a similar type. And then at that point, while that's happening, Cortan shows up, and the lady's like, "Save my boyfriend, please!" And Cortan's like, "I don't give a fuck about mortals. Let's go kill these motherfuckers." And so they all go, and then Malone is like dancing around, and he's singing some crazy song, and she's like, "Quiet, clown!" And he's like, "Oh, too bad. The song has the answer to your prayers." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "The song teaches you how to heal Escapelos." And she's like, "I don't understand." And then he's like, "You have to use immortal blood." And then he sings the song again, and I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy. That song had nothing to do with using immortal blood. Like, this fucking writing is terrible. And so she's like, okay. And so she takes Escapelos, gets in a vehicle. She follows after everyone else who's like surrounding this parking garage where Ramirez, Quentin, and Clyde are, and then they like try to burn it down, but then Quentin and Ramirez and Clyde all drive down in this car, but they get like smashed up anyway and captured and thrown in the back of this thing. It's because Cortan wants the symbolic victory of, he doesn't want to just cut Quentin's head off here, which would win the day. He's got to do the stupid villain thing where he wants to like ceremoniously like cut his head off in like the place where this all began back in like Fraggle Rock or Stonehenge or whatever. And so they transport over there, but then the transport they put him in is actually being driven by the lady, the girlfriend. And so then they go off, and she's like, you have to transfuse blood or he'll die. And there's like back and forth about that. And then one of them's like, we can't stay here. They're like Arak and Cortan are like right there. So they run off and hide some more. And eventually they get to a part, and Ramirez is like, I'm not going to help you guys. Fuck you. And then Quentin's like, no, we have to help. I'll do it. And then Ramirez is like, no, you need to be able to fight. I'll do it. So they do a blood transfusion, and it cures him. And then Cortan and Arak like kind of show up in the same area. Like they're in like a house of mirrors or something, and so that's fun because they're in a house of mirrors. And then she's like, aha, Cortan's gonna reward us bureaucrats for like taking care of this immortal thing. We're so happy. And he's like, you betrayed us. And she's like, go fuck yourself. And then Quentin just grabs Escapelos and is like, no, how about go fuck yourself, because if you do, I'm gonna kill this motherfucker unless you help us get out of here. And she's like, oh, I didn't think that far ahead. So then they escape out of there, and there's a whole fun thing with like the mirrors and like smashing mirrors and seeing people in mirrors and yada yada yada. And eventually Ramirez and Quentin and Clyde like escape, and then Arak finds Escapelos, and then he's like, they like yell at each other about who's going to take the blame for this, and then they're like, how about we just neither of us take the blame, we just pretend like none of this happened. And then they're like, that's a good idea. And so then Ramirez and Quentin and Clyde get away with gold. Hooray. Episode 14 deals more with it just follows straight along. Heavily focused on Arak and Volk and Escapelos' like conflict with each other. Only this time Arak has the upper hand, so that's nice. We're getting some balance between all these guys and what they're doing. So Ramirez and Quentin are going around destroying like the spies and the spies' computer that the bureaucrats are using out and about, and we find out that Volka is like the head spy, I want to say, is a bureaucrat. And also there's more inclination that she is like in love with Escapelos. So Escapelos is losing all the spies, and like things are going really bad. And then Arak's like, I'm gonna go tell Dad / Corton, and so he runs off. And then Escapelos makes a fool of himself by begging Arak not to say anything, and he's like, haha, no, go fuck yourself. And so he heads off, and then Volca gives him a hard time, and then he runs off to like his main chamber, where he like cries some more, or he's like doing stuff, and then he like essentially takes her and like tries to throw her out of the room because he's super pissed off and doesn't know how to deal with his like emotions because he's a child. And then she flips out, and so she comes in and she like hits him upside the back of the head, and then she takes like some of these crystals out of like the crystal mainframe or whatever that like is the computer that runs everything. And that causes like a huge power outage in the city, and then she runs off and tracks down Duncan and Quentin. Meanwhile, Arak, comes back after telling, or he's about to tell Corton about all this stuff, and then he runs off, and then Malone is like around being like a crazy person. And then Arak finds Escapelos like knocked out, and then he gets up and he's like, it's not my fault, it's Volca. And then Volca has like changed her clothes and is like sneaking out, but like she's number 28. And so, it's like it's an easy way to identify hunters and bureaucrats because they all have numbers. Anyway, so then Arak gets on the announcement speaker and is like, stop number 28, but it's too late, she's already escaped. So she tracks down Ramirez and Quentin, and just like last episode, they fall for her lies, like immediately, because she's like, oh, I need to do this, because what I need to do is, Arak's like getting all the power in the city, and like if you can help me, I'll help you with like the bureaucrats, we'll support you, so that when you fight Corton at the end of the days, then it'll just be like a neutral battle, because there won't be anybody else there, because it'll just be the bureaucrats, and we'll side with you or something. Or we'll just be neutral in the whole affair. And they're like, okay, cool. So they go sneak inside the city. And they learn that the city is like, it's like emergency procedures, because they're operating them because the power's out and other stuff. And they get inside and they split up. Ramirez and Clyde are going to go do something, and they end up just like knocking some goons out and then running off. And meanwhile, they're causing a distraction, I guess. And then Quentin and Volga, they're going to go, so one of the crystals she took has like the whole list of all the spies in the city. That's what, Ramirez and Clyde are going to go. They're going to go warn all the rebellion in the city that, they have information about them. Meanwhile, Quentin and Volga are going to go take care of Arak, because taking care of Arak will like, proceed the thing. But then she traps him, wakes up Escapelos, tells him about it. They go get Corton to like show him Quentin. Meanwhile, Ramirez and Clyde run into Malone and Arak, so they fight all those guys. And then Ramirez explains the whole issue with, if Escapelos gets Quentin to Corton, then the bureaucrats will get all the power, so he has to help them escape so that he can maintain power, because it's going to be better for him in like the long run. And Arak's like, all right, that's fine. So he helps rescue Quentin. They all escape. So when Corton shows up with Escapelos and Volga, there's like no Quentin there. It's just Malone hanging upside down. And then Arak is like, drops him off outside and is like, next time won't be so good on you. And they like take off, and I'm like, why didn't he just capture them and take them to Corton himself? Whatever. It's not, it's a children's cartoon. And then Quentin, Ramirez, Clyde meet back up with Gaul, who has their crazy tauntauns or whatever, and they're like, hooray, we saved the day, and they like ride off into the sunset. Episode 15 is full of gobbledygook. So it starts off, and these like astronauts, in a spaceship in space, like wake up, and all these systems start going off and whatnot. And then over in Moganda, Corton gets some sort of like signal about this, and he's like, ooh, I gotta go, everyone stay here. And then Malone of course comes with him, because Malone's the best. And Cortan's like, I gotta meet an old friend, no one come with me except Malone. Okay, so let's go. So they get a sword and they head out, and then we go back up to the space station, and we see like these two jabronis wake up, and there's a girl there too, but she's like already dead. And then they're like, oh my gosh, it's been 700 years, what, how? And then something, they start like crashing, and they're like, please help this lad, help us lad. And then like nothing happens, and then the one guy is like tapping, he's like, don't worry, our experiment is safe with me. And the guy's like, we're all gonna die, and he's like, one of us is gonna die. And so that guy's clearly an immortal. And so then they crash, and then the Emerson guy, he like wakes up, and the crash like wakes up Quentin and Ramirez and Clyde, and so they all get up to go kind of check out what's going on. And then this guy who like followed Corton out is one of the rebels. He like catches up with them. He's like, oh, Corton, some blah blah blah, Cortan's heading out to this thing, there was like a signal, there was like something from the sky coming down, blah blah blah. So they go head over to like this old space station area. I don't know. I almost want to say this show takes place in Australia. Like I'm trying to put things together. But no, at some point they were like in Paris. I don't know, man. Fuck. Anyway. And then they're like, this base is like clearly like an American space station because the guys are dressed like American. Anyway. So the at some point, okay, so Emerson like wakes up, he wanders into like the space station, he looks around, and then he has a flashback to like 700 years ago, and it's when him and the guy and the gal are all being chosen to go on this like spaceship journey. And then Cortan's there, right? And he's like got a nice suit, and he's like hanging out in NASA or whatever this place is supposed to be, whatever like ambiguous space command this is going on here. And then he has a conversation with Emerson. He's like, all right, man, I hooked you up with this thing, so you owe me. You're going to give me like all the results of this experimentation you guys are going to do. And he's like, yeah. And so then we're back to the present. He's like standing around, and then Cortan and Malone like drive up in one of his like super vehicles. And, you know, he goes in there and they have like a little chit chat, and he's like, you owe me, show me this thing. And Emerson gets really excited about it. And he's like, yes, let me show you. And he does all this like technobabble stuff, and they're like going through this thing, and there's like an old 700-year-old computer that was made to like last forever. And it's made of like titanium or some nonsense. And he types into, and it's got like its own power source that can last forever. I don't know. It's a lot of like mumbo. Again, there's a lot of like gobbledygook when it comes to how this episode is like going. But it's like, whatever, it's fun. So he gets like his face scanned and all this stuff, and Malone is like, huh, what the hell? And then Cortan's also like, huh? And I'm like, bro, you've been alive for like 2,000 years. Like, what you should have, it's like nothing should surprise you at this juncture. Like, you should just be like, whatever. Plus you were around when this thing was created. Anyway. So he puts all this information in, and then it opens up like this chamber, and he puts a pen in there, and he's like, we're going to live for, you know, we're going to be the most powerful people in the world, and we're going to rule together and all this stuff. And then he activates like the machine, and it makes the pin, dun, 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 invisible. What? So this thing, so what he says, and this is some of the gobbledygook bullshit, kind of like whatever, just like hand wavy science. It's like, okay, so this gas that they discovered in experimentations on, it changes the molecular, the molecules of a device to make it not be able to be seen by like the naked eye, right? And so, okay, cool. Sounds good. So of course Cortan is like, all right, thanks. There can be only one, and kills that guy, and then he uses that himself. And so when Quentin and Ramirez and Clyde like roll up into this place, they're looking around. Oh, and at some point Malone, like dressed up as Cortan, runs out, jumps in the vehicle, and like starts driving around like crazy. It's like, all right, time to go inside. So they go inside, and they're looking around, and then Cortan shows up, and he's invisible, right? Because it changed the molecular structure of his existence, right? And that doesn't just like change back, but it does later. So Cortan can keep going because we got like 10 more episodes left. Wait, this is episode 15, like 12 more episodes left. Anyway, so there's like they run around. He's like, it's like hijinks ensue. He's like picking up Clyde. Gruel is there, and he can sniff out Cortan. So like, they have some idea of what's going on there. But then he tosses those two away. Ramirez gets knocked out like over like down the building. And so then Quentin and Cortan start fighting a little bit, and then Quentin's like, let's take this outside, and Cortan's like mocking him and laughing at him. And then so they head outside, and they're like fight, and then right as Cortan defeats Quentin and is about to cut off his head, which, hey, what happened to taking him to the the stones, bro? Whatever. Stupid. Ramirez runs out, and he's like, no, and Malone is like, come back. And he's like, oh, there's a Highlander, I'm going to run into him. And because he doesn't see Cortan because he's invisible. And so Quentin like jumps out of the way, and Cortan's like, no. And so he gets hit and knocked back. And then like the invisibility molecule machine like runs out of juice or something. I don't know. He's not carrying it with him either. It's like he went and got his molecules changed, or the gas like dissipated. I don't know. Like however bullshit this thing is. And then he like appears, and then Quentin, Ramirez, and Clyde get in the machine that because Malone hopped off to like apologize for being a dumb fool. And they drive off, and then that's the end of the episode. They have like a funny conversation where like, oh, the thing's out of gas, and he like makes a joke. He's like, oh, it's out of jet fuel, haha. And then Clyde's like, you're an idiot. And then she's like, well, fix it. You know everything about everything. You've been around for like 5,000 years. And he's like, oh yes, I don't know I can't fix this, but I can teach you how to use the most ancient machine of all. And she's like, what's that? And he's like, your feet. Dun dun dun. Stupid. But fun. We start off episode 16 with a chase. Quentin and crew are running away from Arak, who's chasing them down. He's got them. They're running through like this city. There's no place to hide or whatnot. And then they find these stairs going downstairs. And they head down, and all of a sudden they're in a subway station. And Ramirez is like, "Oh, it's a subway station." And they're like, "What's this?" And he's like, "Doesn't matter. Let's go that way through the dark." And Clyde's like, "I refuse." And then they get to a little tiff about that. And it's like, "Oh, the hunters have found them, and they're coming. And then all of a sudden, like a subway train comes by, and Ramirez is like, "What the fuck?" And so they like get on. And so they hop on. And then Gluff, or whatever his name is, the little animal, refuses, and then they start shooting, and he's like, all right, fine. So they hop on, and they head over to, like, the next station, and then Arak, like, sends his troops throughout the whole station complex to kind of, like, figure it out. And then they get pulled up to a station, and this old man walks out, and he's like, "I'm Zach. I saved you." And then we find out that many years ago, he's not immortal, but many years ago, as in like, I don't know, 50 years ago, the hunters came, and his whole family and everyone got taken away, and he's the only one who like survived. So he came down here and like has been surviving ever since, and like hasn't gone back up to the surface in like all these many years, right? Sad stuff. So but then the hunters are like searching around. So he's like, "Come with me," and he takes them to like the secret passage where he like goes through, and then he puts like all the bricks back in the wall, so like nobody like, if you're just looking, you don't notice that like it's a pathway. And as soon as they get in there, he mentions like these creatures, like I can't remember what exactly called. They're giant ants, the giant ants, and they're like, "Oh no, we're fucked." And he's like, no, I've found a way to like, I found their like pheromone, so I can shoot them myself, and then I've kind of figured out how to like communicate with them using the antenna. So he sprays everybody with the stinky goo, and then he goes and starts chatting with the ant. Meanwhile, Clyde's like, "Oh, this stinks," so she takes a bunch of moss and like cleans herself up. And so then they're traveling through this area, and because Clyde like cleaned herself up, one of the ants comes walking by and is like, "Uh-oh, threat!" And so it comes over and snaps her up and runs off. And they're like, "Oh no, we gotta go!" And so they chase after her. Meanwhile, Arak and crew are still searching for the way to get in. Back over to Quentin and crew, they head over to the Queen's chamber, and they're like, "Oh no!" And then Clyde gets brought in, and so Quentin like goes and attacks the ant carrying her in. And there was a funny conversation earlier. Oh, yeah, there's a funny conversation earlier with Zach where he's like, "Oh, they didn't kill her right away. I know exactly where they took her and why." And then we never understand why. But anyway, so he frees his sister, and then the Queen starts freaking out because she goes to grab Clyde, and he attacks her, and then she summons all these ants. And so then Quentin and Ramirez are trying to hold off the ants while Zach is like communicating with the Queen, trying to like smooth things out. He eventually does, and it's like, okay, cool, let's get the fuck out of here. So they start leaving, but at that point, one of Arak's like top level goons like finds the entrance to the secret chamber, and so they're leaving, and then Arak's crew is like coming out, and so they get into like a fight, and Zach grabs Clyde and like runs off, and meanwhile Ramirez and Quentin like give it their best they got, but then they get captured. So they're dragged out, and Arak is like taunting and like super excited because he's finally gonna get like his just desserts or whatever. And it's right before they put them in like the prison carrier, they fight back, and then they're about to get like got again when Zach comes rolling in with the giant ants, and so they attack the crew, and that allows them to like free themselves. And then we get like a nice little moment at the end where Zach is like, "Oh, I haven't been outside for so long, and like it's so beautiful up here, and there's flowers, and like I can roll around in the grass," and they're like, and then Clyde's like, "Oh, it's much better than those stinky ants," and he's like, "I like those stinky ants, but yes, I do need to stay up here and live with humans and not be like in the ant hole anymore." And then and that wraps up that episode. One thing I want to mention here, I forgot to mention in episode 15, is that we finally, so throughout the last 30 episodes or so, they've talked a lot about the great catastrophe that like caused like the world-ending apocalypse or whatever, but we never got like confirmation of what that was. From what I recall, they might have mentioned it once, but in the last episode, in episode 15, we saw a little flashback. Nobody's flashback. We just saw like a flashback because everyone who was involved in this flashback is dead. Of the guys at the military base or NASA or whatever, they're standing there, and all of a sudden this giant asteroid comes zooming into the Earth, and then they're like, "No," and it crashes and kills like everybody except the Immortals, right? So, yeah. So that's I think it's not a flashback per se, but it's like Cortan telling Emerson what happened, because he's like, "What happened to the Earth?" Yeah, I think so it does make a little bit more sense now that I'm like recalling it from when I watched it a bit ago. Okay, yeah, so the Great Catastrophe is just it's like a giant meteor or like an asteroid that hit the Earth and killed everybody, or most everybody. Episode 17 here is dope. We're actually going to fight between Cortan and McLeod. Wow. Anyway, so it starts off McLeod and Quentin and Ramirez. Yeah, it is McLeod, huh? Anyway, McLeod and Ramirez and Clyde and Hall or whatever. They're hiding in like a ravine, watching some of Arak's men raid a village essentially and steal a bunch of like slaves and then ride off. And they talk about how unfortunate that is and how they want it to stop, but the only way to get it to stop is for Quentin to get all the powers from the Jetterers, which we haven't seen in a few episodes, to be completely honest. It's almost like the writers just kind of like, meh, we'll get around to it eventually. And so they go to check out the village, see if there's any survivors, and they find one. They find Doogie, I think his name is, not Dougie. I think it's Doogie. Anyway, so Doogie was like hiding in a tree or whatever, and then they talk about taking him with them, and Ramirez is like, no, and then Doogie's like, well, my grandfather lives in like the Eagle's Nest over there, we can just go there, and then, I just drop me off, it'll just be like a day or so, and then they're, all right, fine. And so they were taking him, and then McLeod, Quentin, is riding with him and like wrestling around with him and training him, and he's like a little brother, he's like a little kid, right? This Doogie guy. Yeah. And so then Clyde gets like super jealous and is like complaining, like women stuff, right? Bitches him. Anyway, so she's written like a little girl who's in love with her brother, right? So perfectly written. And so they finally get to the Eagle's Rest, and then Doogie's like, oh, let me head up there and check and see if my grandpa's around. And then they have like a lift, kind of like an elevator thing where you got to pull in a rope, but only one person can go up at a time. And so everyone in this like menagerie has like incredible arm strength. It's not like other people are helping lift. It's like this kid climbs in this thing and just like lifts himself up using this thing. And granted, when you're using like pulleys and stuff, it's a lot less weight, but still, it's like, god damn, that's pretty impressive. So and then Clyde does it later, and I'm like, and with like the dog creature, and I'm like Gollum or whatever, and it's like, god damn, dude, she's been like hitting the gym this like journey of theirs. Okay, so he goes up, and then he's looking around, and he looks at like some Da Vinci like lighter thing, and then he pulls out this machine, and he's like, I'll save you, Grandpa, and you're like, uh-oh, it's betrayal. And so he types some stuff into like this ridiculous looking like computer laptop thingy that he's been carrying around somehow secretly, and then he heads to, and it goes right to this guy's name, Escapelos, the bureaucrat. I always thought he was a scientist, but no, I was wrong. The bureaucrat guy, and he runs into Cortan. He's like, hey, your plan worked, and everyone's like, oh, you're so smart and genius the way you play people against other people, and Cortan's like, oh, ha, ha. And so they start heading over to like this Eagle's Rest area. And then Ramirez is like, all right, time to go. Good luck with your grandpa. And then Quentin convinces him to like stick around so that Doogie's not like by himself or whatever after everyone's like pulled themselves up on this lift. And so they'll go to sleep. And then late in the evening, Climb and wakes up, and then wakes Clyde up, and then they climb like falls, and Clyde like gets in the lift and heads down, and then we find out that the grandpa is around, but he doesn't live in like this Eagle's Nest area necessarily. He has like a camp somewhere else in like the valley or something, and so that's where he's at. And so the guy rescues the doggy and like hangs out with Clyde, and they talk about Doggy, and he's like, Doggy's here, oh no, you need to get out of here, follow like the moss that way. And she's like, what about my brother and everything? And he's like, oh, don't worry, I'll take care of him. Oh, and while this is all going on, at some point they see like the hunters riding up to like the Eagle's Nest area, right? Okay, and so he heads off to save Quentin and Ramirez and Doogie, and Clyde and Climb like head out of the valley through like just walking through the woods. Okay, so with that, we head back over to the Eagle's Nest area where Quentin like wakes up, sees his sister's gone, like, oh no, what the fuck are we gonna do? And then he senses, and then they wake up Doogie and they yell at him, and then they sense like Cortan coming up like the lift, so then Quentin cuts it and like, oh fuck, what are we gonna do? And then the grandpa like shows up through like a secret passage, and we find out that Cortan had lied about kidnapping the grandfather and would like only release the grandfather if Doogie like betrayed the Highlander or whatever. And so it's like understandable on some level, but still fucked up. And so then Cortan like ends up like being up in the treehouse area somehow, and so Duncan's like, I'll take care of that. Or Duncan, goddamn, sorry. Quentin is like, okay, I'll take care of this. So he goes and starts fighting Cortan, and we actually get like a really good like fight between them two, like shockingly good for like a 90s, Saturday morning cartoon. Because they fight, Quentin's like holding his own, and then the grandpa, Ramirez is about to do something, and the grandpa's like, no, come with me. And so they go and they get like, he's built this like lighter thing, right? And they lay it out, and then there's a couple of them, it seems like, because Ramirez and the grandfather, they take one, and then Dogi takes the other and goes and rescues Quentin. And then, Cortan's like, "Rah!" So they all take that out of there. And then they meet up with Clyde, and then Dogi, apologizes, and Clyde apologizes for being a bitch. And then everyone, laughs because they're like, "Oh, we're going to go ride on this thing, and everything's great. Ha, ha, ha. Hooray." Episode 18 is kind of a wackadoo one because we get to meet Gaul's people, the Grins. Anyway, so as usual, the episode starts off, the Quentin crew is running away from Arak and the hunters, and eventually they get to this island, and once they get on the island, they get assaulted by a whole bunch of these not even assaulted, they get captured by a whole bunch of these wild Grins. Well, first we see some little ones, and it's they're joking around about how Gaul can be they call him a mother, but he's clearly a dude because he's banging some chick at the end of this one. Anyway, so they that's funny, and then they get captured. They get taken to the Grin High Council, and then Gaul is going back and forth with some giant fat Gaul who's just eating fruit and laughing a lot. And then we see some babe Grauls as well. It's oh, okay, here we go. And then some crazy dude with blue hair rolls up. He's "Oh, I've been living with the Grins for years. I can speak their language, and I was a great hunter in this area, but now I'm hiding here with the blah blah blah." And it's so okay, what's going on? So Grawl. We'll call him Gaul. Gaul needs to have a battle to prove his dominance because the wild Grins think that tamed Grin are bitches, essentially. I think he called them, I can't remember what he called them. He called them weak ass, or he called them some I can't remember. Anyway. And so, okay, so step number one, he has to fight. So he has to fight this guy, and the guy's beating the shit out of him, right? And then eventually Grawl Grawl, whatever. He ends up hitting him with some stuff, and then tricking him, and then tripping him over, and then pushing him off the ledge here, and he falls in some goo. And everyone has a good laugh, and is one of the ladies is super impressed. And then it's all right, time for trial 2. Oh no, what's trial 2? Trial 2 is that they take this snow spider, I think is what they call it, and they put it in a cage, and he's got to pull it out, and so he does, and then it's very anticlimactic. And then the guy makes some commentary. It's oh, snow spiders are very unpoisonous, and it's how would Grin know anything about this? He's I guess he's semi-intelligent, right? Anyway, so then they have a big celebration, and everything's doing great. And meanwhile, the hunters have come over, and then oh no, what are we gonna do? And then the guy's oh, the Grins have put traps everywhere. And then he's can you tell them to put more traps, and we'll distract them and make sure they follow them? And he's sure can. And so then the hunters fall into all these traps and are having a real rough time. And then at some point, Clyde gets captured by Arak. And so he uses that as a bargaining tool to get Quentin to come out. And so Quentin goes, "But that's a trap." And he's "Aha, I can do traps too." It's 10 apples up on top. Anyway, so, and Quentin's "Aha, but not as well as me." Sorry, I love that fucking book so much. Because the Grin come out and they start shooting fiery arrows at the hunters. And there's a lot of Grins and not as many hunters. And then Ramirez runs up with a bunch, and then Quentin goes to fight Arak and cuts his hand off, and he's "You will get the fuck out of here with all your men immediately." And he's "Okay, fine, I will do that." And so they get on rafts and get sent away, and then there's a big celebration that the Grin defeated the hunters and whatnot. And then it's right as Ramirez and Quentin and Clyde are "All right, time to go, where's Girl?" And they're looking around Girl, and then he pops his head out of a bush, and then a female pops her out of the bush, and then they go back in the bush because they're fucking. And then everyone laughs, including Clyde. How does Clyde know what's going on? I guess she's not that young. She's probably 10. She knows what sex is. Anyway, great episode. Episode 19 focuses heavily on the Entima, I think is what they call them, which are the giant ants. Yay, the giant ants are back, but not the crazy guy who talks to the giant ants. I guess he wasn't that crazy. There's a lot of crazy people in this show, so living underground with ants is not a very big deal. Anyway, so the rebel, okay, so there's a guy who works in Muganda who's all about the giant ants, the Entima, and he wants to use them to destroy Shantytown, which is where the rebels are. And so this guy who's a spy inside the government, he goes and they do their whole give him a coin, this is no value, the value of things is something, I don't remember what they say it a lot. And then he goes and tells a barbarian lady who is a Donahue, or what are they fucking called? She's from that clan that Quentin's from, before they realized that he was adopted or whatever. He's actually McLeod. And so she's oh no, what are we going to do? They're going to use the giant bugs against us. And they come up with some sort of scheme, but then she decides she's going to go talk to Quentin and Ramirez about it. So they go talk to them, and then Ramirez is we can go to the entomologist, Jetterer. What's an entomologist? An entomologist is somebody who studies bugs. Oh, excellent, because they can help us with the the bug situation. Awesome. High fives all around. So they just wander over to this guy who I don't know. I thought Quentin was trying to gather all these Jetterer capabilities, but it's like next scene he's giving him the quickening, and I was like, that was fast. Anyway, and so then they start discussing like ants and how they function and like pheromones and all this stuff, and they're like, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to craft like a fear pheromone, and then we're going to release it in the city, because part of the concern, there's like a faction break within the rebels. So one of the guys is like, okay, we're going to sneak in to like there's near Maganda, there's like a lot of desert, but also right now there's a jungle for some reason, because whatever. Sometimes it's like the Arctic. I don't know. Maybe it's a moving city. And so there's like wild entomas in the jungle, but then the guy's like pacified some. The entomologist who works, or like the ant guy who works for Corton. And so he's going to use those ants to attack people in the shantytown, like around Moganda, to get rid of the rebels. And so what the rebels do is they get some of the wild entoma, and they like lead them over to. Actually, no, let's stay here. They lead them over to the city, and they're going to like stop like the grinder. The grinder's like in the city. It protects the city, like Moganda, from like random shit coming in through the sewers and whatnot, because it grinds it up. So they're going to stop that. They're going to get the ants to like head inside and start causing a ruckus, and then they're going to go in there and they're going to get revenge on this guy who uses the ants to like kill their people. And the barbarian lady, I say barbarian because she's got like, it's like if you played like Diablo or some of these other games that have like Diablo people, they have like the funny markings and they're wearing like furs and stuff, and that, or like Dungeons and Dragons, and so that's what this chick looks like. Like nobody looks like her, just her. So all right. And so she's like, no, I don't want to do that. So she gets Quentin, and so that's how that kind of broke up. So they're trying to find like a peaceful way where they don't kill everybody, but they can still like stop the ants from causing problems. And so they come up with this fear pheromone, and so they're going to go in and utilize it. And so then the two groups meet up, they argue about what's right and wrong, and the ants are like causing a ruckus. And Cortan's actually kind of concerned because like these ants could like kill him, right? And then there's even like a comment by Ramirez at some point about the ants like being able to cut off heads. So because they're gonna like eat you, they're gonna bite your head off with their claws, and yum. And so then like a crazy battle ensues, and it was kind of hard to follow because it was like bouncing around a lot. And then so at one point I was like, wait, I thought they're going to use fear pheromones to drive the ants off, and they are, but they're like, you just see Quentin going around like cutting stuff and trying to get people to move and like breaking an elevator, and then you see Corton and his crew trying to like hide and then like tactically retreat, and all this stuff, and everyone's like freaking out. And then the ants don't fight because they're all the same ants, and so like they have a queen in the wild, and so they're like, no, we're going to do this, and they start causing a ruckus. And then at some point, Ramirez and like the old man Jetterer are just like standing there looking at a fan system, and they're like, should we open it? Should we do that or that? And it's like, well, one makes sense, but that maybe it makes so much sense that the other way is right because it would be a trap. And I was like, this is like an internal system. Like, who's setting up a fucking trap? like they knew we were coming, so they maybe set this up for a trap. Anyway, we don't get any resolution on what they decide. They just like eventually open a hatch and throw the stuff in there, and then it like saves the day. And unfortunately for Quentin, the queen ant got into like Cortan's palace and drove him back against the stairs when it was about to eat him up. And then right at the last second, the pheromones kick in. So if they just like waited like one more minute. To be fair, Quentin is also being attacked by an ant at this point, but he looks like he's a lot better off. So if they'd waited like another minute, I think Quentin would have been okay, and Cortan would have died, and that would have been the end. And that would have been like, ta-da, we won because of the ants, hooray, our great saviors. And then there's like some funny like commentary at the end, because they gotta go, but they'll come back because Quentin needs to learn more from this guy. And in my head I was like, I thought that was the point of the quickening, is that he gets all the knowledge, but I guess like he can get like more practice. As I don't know how the quickening thing's supposed to work, to be honest. I mean, before he's like, oh, I can work on like a nuclear power plant now. He was like doing it, but then here it's like, oh, I need to learn more about ants, and it's like, didn't you gain all his knowledge anyway? And then Ramirez is like, yeah, and then we can kill those fucking ants. And then Quentin is like, no, we must live at peace with the ants. And then what's her name? Clyde is like, you scared of ants? And I was like, oh, she's in this episode? Fantastic. Next episode, we get another Jetterer. Finally, we're getting Jetterers here. There's like 5 or 6 episodes. This one's Ava. She is the Jetterer of image technology, like broadcasting, cameras, the hologram situation or whatnot. So the episode starts off actually with Ramirez and the Quentin and crew. They roll up to this temple, and this guy's like, Corton's in there, and Ramirez is like, why would he be in such a remote place? So they head in there, and they're looking around, and then Corton is there, oh no, and then Quentin like pulls out his sword and starts fighting him, but he's a hologram. So eventually, Ramirez kind of figures it out. Quentin's like freaking out. He's like, he's a ghost. And then we flip over to this redheaded cutie named Ava, and she is working on, like, Cortan's like in this crazy bubble, and she's broadcasting, and they're talking about how, like, the only reason she's still alive is because she's the one who knows how to, like, use this equipment, but eventually that'll not be the case. So I guess if he cuts the head off, he doesn't get the information, which doesn't make sense because there are other immortals who are like, cut my head off and get all my information. And that's literally how, like, the quickening kind of works. Not that the information, but in not in like the live action shows or the movies, but in this, that is how it's like kind of always ran. So we get and so they go back and forth, and then she like escapes and runs off and grabs a motorcycle and breaks out of this like snowy base that they're hanging out in. And so Arak goes after him and chase. She is able to like get away somewhat, and then she like gets to a point where she is like on a cliff and she slips off, and then Arak's like, give me your head and you're coming back with us. And she's like, go fuck yourself. And then she, dies, and he's like, oh well, she's dead. And so he gets back, and meanwhile Quentin and Ramirez have like come to the broadcasting station to find Ava because he figured like that's where the hallucinations are coming from, and Ramirez is concerned that she's broken her like oath, right, to not help Cortan and yada yada, and that's like his knowledge, I guess, his vengeance. And so he goes to and so they're racing with their like tauntauns over to the broadcasting station when Glum, the little man, the little monster that runs around with him, he's like, no, over here. So they go over there, see Eva down in the snow, they go get her, and then she like kind of wakes up, and she's like, oh my gosh, who's this? And he's like, oh, this is the Highlander. And she's like, let me give you the quickening right now, because this power can't go to Corton, and he like really wants it, right, really, really bad. And so they do their quickening right now, and the quickening this time, instead of being like fun electricity that kind of blows up electrical stuff and sends lightning bolts, it is like, if you ever played Chrono Cross, there's like the ultimate combo move, which is that I don't know if it's even a combo, but it might just be Chrono's like ultimate power. It's like an Ultima spell that just creates this giant dome of destruction that goes everywhere. Like it's like blowing up trees, destroying vehicles, like blasting everybody back except like Ramirez and Clyde, because they're okay, because I guess they're the good guys. It was like so ridiculous. And because Arak went back, and then Corton's like, she jumps off the cliff, go back and get that motherfucker and bring her back right now. And he's like, okay. So the Arak goes back, and they have this whole thing, and they end up capturing Ava and Clyde right after the quickening event, and Quentin and Ramirez try to fight him off, and then Arak's like, adios, and like takes him back, and then Quentin's like, I gotta go fight right now. So he heads over him to the broadcasting station, and then there's like some fun little back and forth with like a bunch of hologram Cortons, and Quentin being like overconfident, and eventually like real Corton like shows up and like hits Quentin, fights him, knocks him down, takes his sword, and then he's about to come up and like cut his head off when Ramirez shows up and drops like a whole bunch of like lights and shit on him. And so that crushes him, and then they lock him in like the studio, and then they all race back so that they can get access to what's going on here? So that they can get access to the and they race back, and they beat up Arak, and I don't know what my brain is. Arak and Escapelos, and grab Ava and Clyde, and then they plant a bunch of explosives and like blow up the whole studio thing, so we can't make holograms, even if Escapelos was able to figure it out. And then they vamos out of there, and then they have like, and then Corton is like, no, motherfuckers. And then afterwards, they're all kind of hanging out, and then they're eating some food that Ramirez made, and then Clyde is like, if we need a super weapon, we'll just give Corton your food. And then they all laugh, and then Ramirez is like, meow. Episode 21 focuses on a clone. That's right, we have clones. Immortal clones. Oh, Lord. Anyway, so, fuck. Jeez. Okay, sorry about that. I hit my elbow against the door because I was laughing so hard. Man, I apologize. I am like so sleepy. I need to go to bed sooner tonight. Anyway, Or was I? Oh, yeah. So we start off, and there's like this sneakopotamus who's like coming into the camp of Quentin and Ramirez and Clyde, and he's about to like cut off Quentin's head when he like wakes up and, fights him off, and the guy like skirts out of there. And after he's gone, Quentin's like, "Hey, Ramirez, you knew that guy?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's Fredrickson." And he tells a story about Fredrickson, how he was the jetterer of like science and genetics or something, and that they found an oil rig that had tons of oil, and so he was able to do like his experimentations with like cold storage and like revitalizing dead species and like Jurassic Park kind of shit. Anyway, but now he's betrayed his oath. So then Ramirez is like, I gotta go fight him. That's my job. I am the jetterer of revenge, of like oath breakers. So he really should have killed Duncan MacLeod. But anyway, so he goes off and he finds like his armor and his sword, which is not at the Stonehenge. Stonehenge really hasn't been in this series. Season 2, like, at all. But it's like buried under some trees or whatever, which, to be fair, he did dig it up from under the thing. But then he says something about, like, I can't believe I have to pull up my sword to, like, do this. And it's not, like, to do this again. And it's like, did they have totally different writers, like, in the second season? Like, he's done this, like, twice now. Anyway, doesn't matter. So he goes off, and he demands Quentin and Clyde, like, stay behind. So, of course, Quentin and Clyde don't stay behind. They, like, follow after him. And so he heads out to, like, this oil rig, and he gets in there, and Fredrickson like meets up with him. He's like, "What's up, homie?" And you already know something's sus because when Fredrickson attacked Quentin before, he had long hair, and now he has a ponytail. Well, he still has long hair, but it's a ponytail instead of just like free flowing. And so they fight, and then Quentin rolls up. He's like, "Stop! That's not him." And the guy's like, "Yeah, that's what I've been trying to tell you." Ramirez is like, "I don't believe you." And it's like, and then Quentin's like, "When I fought him, I stabbed him in the wrist, or I cut his wrist, and like it's been so fast that there's no way he could have healed already." Okay, fair. And so you just gotta look at the wrist. And so Ramirez is like, "Let me see your wrist." And so he does. And he doesn't have a cut, so oh no. And then Fredrickson explains that, he's been doing all this genetic mutations and cloning and whatnot. And so he cloned himself like another immortal so that he could have like a buddy to like go do stuff. But he didn't realize that when he cloned himself, the guy was also going to be immortal and also just evil. He's just evil. He has all he didn't get any of the good, he just got the evil parts. And so he like smashed up the place, they had a fight, and that guy took off. And he wants to be the last, he wants to be the only one because that's like the immortal thing, right? So that's why. So okay, so Ramirez, I know, I apologize for saying so many times. So Ramirez goes off with Quentin to hunt this guy down and fight him. Meanwhile, Clyde and Golm are going to stay with Fredrickson and just hang tight. Ramirez and Quentin, they head out, they find a guy's camp, they ride it for a little bit, and then they like realize that Fredrickson is like he's tricked them, and he ran back to like fight real Fredrickson. Meanwhile, fake Fredrickson like rolls up to fight real Fredrickson, and they have a little fight, and that goes poorly for like real Fredrickson. But then they look out and they see Quentin and Ramirez have like come back, and so real Fredrickson says like, "Hey, if you kill me, they're going to see the quickening and know that you're not me, and they're just going to kill you." And he's like, "Oh," and so he like puts him in like a prison cell or something, and then he doesn't put his hair back, so as a visual indicator for us to know who's evil and who's good, which is nice. So Quentin rolls up, and he's like, "Oh, the evil one, he's around here somewhere. I wasn't able to defeat him. So I need to give you the Jetter Oath thingy, all the knowledge, so you'll be okay." And so they get ready to do it, and the guy like attacks Quentin, and right before he's about to like just strike and kill Quentin notices the cut on his wrist, and he's like, "Ramirez, my sword!" And so he tosses it, and they go fight, and then fake Fredrickson like rushes off, and Quentin tracks him down, and they fight, and eventually he knocks the guy into like a fan, which like cuts him up real good and takes off his head because there's like a quickening explosion. And then they go and rescue Fredrickson that Golm's found, and that leads to him being like, "Okay, time to do the quickening. Here, take all my knowledge of science and genetics." And so they do, and he promises never to like clone himself again, which is a baller move, I gotta say. But that is like, as soon as they do like the transfer of information, that's the end of the episode. Next up, we get a cult. We get the cult of the immortal. What's that? So we get all these like minor looking dudes, like a muscle mommy and stuff, and we got all these. Their kids who are like, they look like adults, not even teenagers, but like they're young men and women, are being sacrificed to appease the immortal, because if they don't, the immortal's gonna like cause earthquakes and destroy them and whatnot. And this muscle mommy and her husband, good boy, are they're like, "No, not our son, something. And then there's like this priest, and he's like yelling back and forth, and they finally decide, they're like, "All right, fine, we'll do it tomorrow. No big deal." And the reason why it's no big deal is because this cult is actually a trick by Cortan, of course. So Cortan is like setting up these like false idols of like Quentin MacLeod, like, and he put them together pretty quick, it seems, because they're like gigantic statues in like caves. Like, what the fuck? And then they have like Volta's back. Hey, it's Volta. You remember her? Asclepios' like girlfriend or wannabe girlfriend, I guess, from her perspective. He's too busy doing his job. He's married to his job. Anyway. So she's got these like explosions. She's making the mountain rock, and they got like a light show, and they got all this bullshit and whatnot. And they're trying to cause rebellions against Quentin. And so there's like a report back, and Cortan's getting a lot of praise for his like wonderful idea, and it's actually it is a fantastic idea. Because we head over to, after we kind of get all this information, we see Quentin and Ramirez and Clyde and Gulm running away from a bunch of these miners, and they're like, kill the immortal, cut off his head. And they're like, they finally get like a break, and they're like, holy shit, how do these guys know, one, I'm immortal, two, how to take like that killing me is to cut off my head, and three, why are they so mad? I haven't done anything. And so there's a lot of questions about that. And so they like run away, and they hide, and they track one of these guys down, and they almost grab him so he can tell them what's going on, but he runs away, and then the hunters show up, and he'd rather like almost die to the hunters, like get knocked out by getting crashed into by their vehicles and allow the immortal to get him or whatever. So pretty extreme. So they grab that guy after the hunters like drive by, and they take him back to like the town. And meanwhile, the town people are all grabbing like these big pickaxes, and they're like, we're gonna hunt this fucking immortal down and kill him before our sons and daughters get picked up. Well, they just say sons, but there were definitely chicks in there. Sacrificial pit as well. Oh, and so the thing is that they're not getting sacrificed; they're getting put on little transports and taken back to Magunda to be like slaves. And apparently this scheme has been going on for enough time that like the population of Magunda, that's like the working slave, is like maximized capacity of like the city, and it's a glory to Cortan and all that shit. So then Quentin and Ramirez bring the guy back, and then they run into Muscle Mommy and her crew, and they end up capturing her. And then she finally like listens to what they got to say, and they like plead their case. And because of Clyde, because she's like a little girl, is like, leave my brother alone. She's like, all right, I'll listen to what you have to say. So they track down the temple where all this stuff's going on, and they're having like the daily sacrifice like the next day. And so they sneak Hippopotamus in there. And then Quentin and Ramirez and Muscle Mommy like get like some of the other miners to like believe them as well, or Muscle Mommy does mostly. And then the three of them, or the four of them, I think Clyde was with them too, they head downstairs and they start busting the place up, and like the kids go down into the sacrifice, and yeah, Clyde does too, because she frees all the almost slaves, and they rebel, and they destroy the bureaucrats, and they put them back in the cage and send them back up, and then they ride the top of the cage, and then Quentin like makes his case, and the priest and all his like priests guys are like, right, let's get the fuck out of here. And they try, but the miners grab them up, and then they just let them all go back to Cortan and tell them that like there will be no false gods worshipped here. Like, why can't you just like take care of business? Anyone around here? Because it's a cartoon, I get it, so you gotta keep doing it. Anyhow, and yeah, that wraps it up. They're like, thank you for teaching us, and we're gonna spread the word that like no more of this cult. The cult's done. And hooray! We pick up on episode 23 with the Dundees and the Highlander and Ramirez. They're all just hanging out in a forest, and then they see Asclepios like driving around, and they're like, what is he doing? And they say, follow him. And he goes to like the Dust Star. Like it's like this big, what do you call it in English? Sphere. It's a big sphere, but it almost looks like it's not completed yet. It's got this like opening or something. It's very interesting looking. And they're like, what the hell is this? And so they're like looking at it and trying to figure it out. And then Asclepios goes in there and he's like, activate it. And so what it does is it has this like ball at the top of glass. And then they lift up these like mirrors, and it gets all the rays of the sun and focuses it on this thing, and that like charges up like the power of like these rays, and they like blow the shit out of this forest. And so the Dundees and McLeod and Ramirez have to run away, and they're like, holy shit. Meanwhile, Cortan back in his home base is like, or Arak is coming back from like again not capturing the Highlander, and Malone is like yelling, he's like teasing him and laughing and dancing around, and Cortan's like, I have had enough of this bullshit. You and Asclepios will work together and you will capture McLeod, so go make up. And then like that's an order. And so Arak is like, oh, so he heads down to like the bureaucrat area, but like there's nobody there. But then he finds like this like schematic that's just like laying on the ground, or laying on the desk there, and he's like, the fuck is this? And so he picks it up, and then Volta like shows up and yanks it out of his arms and like makes a break for it, and he's like, hey Volta, give me that back. And she's like, go fuck yourself. And so then he sends his hunters to like follow after her, and so she takes off to go to like this, they call it a tower, but I don't know, I didn't really see a tower, just looked like a dome that was, or not a dome, a sphere that was like just sitting on some rocks. Anyway, so she takes off, and then we go back to Ramirez telling everybody like, oh, he's charging the power of the sun. That's kind of genius. No lie. But Volta there's like 411 is able to like catch up with Volta, or not almost catch up with Volta. She like enters the sphere, and then she's like, the hunter has followed me, and this guy's trying to figure out, the 411 hunter, he's trying to figure out where to go and how to get inside this thing. And then they use the power of the sun to blast him. And then the McLeod and Ramirez and everyone are like, oh shit, that guy's dead. Wait, I have an idea. And so they take his armor, and Quentin wears it, and he drives back over, because they're like, oh, Arak and Asclepios are still not, they still hate each other and are still fighting against each other. This is perfect. So they go, and part of the thing is the Dundees were trying to like settle in this area, but now they can't settle in this area because Cortan's reach is too far or whatever. So they head. So Quentin pretends to be this hunter, goes, tells Arak about this weapon, and then in the next morning he like leads them back over there. Meanwhile, Ramirez with the Dundees are like preparing something to take care of the sphere. So we get a cute little battle with like Arak running up and like firing all his tanks at like the sphere, and the sphere charging up and then blasting a bunch of the tanks and stuff. But Arak's able to like tear down the door based on Quentin's information, and they all rush in there. And then Quentin, while they're all fighting and gathering up like the bureaucrat forces, sneaks on upstairs, grabs Asclepios as like a prisoner, and is like, fire on Maganda. And they're like, don't do it. And he's like, you better do it or you're gonna die. And he's like, do it. That was easy. And so they charge up the thing and they start fire, since the sun's already up at this point. And it's kind of genius. Arak like showed up at night. They should have just left like the whole night, but whatever, they're dumb. And so they blast the shit out of like the glass dome above Cortan, and then at that point Arak like rolls up, and Quentin's like, aha, and so him and Arak start fighting. And meanwhile the Dundees have their little like airships, and they're not ships, they're like planks of wood that are held up by like these big balloons. They like roll on in, and they like attach to like the top part where like the glass and like the mirrors are, and they start setting explosives everywhere. And then Duncan, fighting Arak, like heads upstairs somehow. Like it looked like he was going down an elevator, and then he's like up at the top. And so he jumps on with these guys, and they like blow the whole fucking place apart. And then they take off, and they're like, "Go fuck yourselves," as they like sail away into like the sky. And then Arak's like, "You're in a lot of trouble, Asclepios. I'm gonna tell Cortan everything about your weapon that attacked him." And then Asclepios is like, "We came here and destroyed the weapon that Cortan was gonna use, and we both failed at finding the Highlanders. Maybe we should just shut the fuck up and not say anything." And Arak's like, yeah, that's fair. And then we get the final scene where the Dundees are like on their way to like find somewhere else to live, right? Because they keep getting pushed around by Cortan and Arak and whatnot. And then the girl, Clyde's like, oh no, will the Dundees ever find like a home they can live in? And Ramirez is like, maybe someday. And that wraps up episode 23. Episode 24 picks up with another chase by the Major Arak and his crew to the Highlander. They're doing some ziplining to get away across this like cavernous area, and at some point in this like mad escape, Ramirez like falls down this like waterfall thing and cracks his head because well, first he drops Quentin's sword into the water, and then he floats away, and Quentin and Clyde and Gaul race to get him, and they just find his cloak, and then they're looking around, yelling for him, and then Ramirez like wakes up on the shore somewhere. And he's like, who are you? And Quentin's like, you're Ramirez. I'm Quentin. You're like my mentor or whatever. And he's like, no, you're another immortal. There can be only one. I just know Connor. And he's like, I'm not going to fight you. You're a child. I'll come get you later. And they like argue back and forth about that whole situation. And then Ramirez like races off to get like his armor and sword and whatnot. And then there's like a conversation at some point about Cortan. And so they separate because Quentin's like, I'll go get the sword and then I'll help jog his memory. So he heads back over to the waterfall, and then Ramirez heads the other direction to get like his armor and shit. And then Arak's like, let's go get Ramirez. I don't know what that fucking dude's doing, but he's always fucking around. And so they do. But then Quentin is able to like find him first, sort of, because someone mentions we get like a flashback at some point, and it's like pre the Cataclysm, I want to say, and Ramirez, it's got to be pre-Cataclysm. It's pre the Jeddar Oath and all that stuff, because it's Cortan fighting Ramirez on top of like a volcano, like a non-active, well, it's an active volcano, but it's not like exploding, but there's like gas and stuff, so they fight like all night long, and then at some point they both like pass out from all like the gas, and like, we'll fight here again someday. And so when Quentin's like, oh look, there's Cortan's men, we gotta run away, and Ramirez is like, why would I run away? Ramirez never runs away. And he goes up to Arak and he's like, who's your leader? And he's like, I'm the leader. And it's like, tell Cortan to meet me at like Tabla Rasa or something. And Arak's like, what? And he's like, he'll know what that means. And then he like rides off in his little tauntaun. So Arak goes and tells Cortan, he's like, yes, finally, I'll use Ramirez. And what about the Highlander? Oh, don't worry about the Highlander. The Highlander is always like around Ramirez, so it'll be a trap. It'll be excellent. So he heads off in that direction. So Ramirez rides up to this like volcano, and Cortan shows up, and they start jaw-jacking with each other. Quentin like rolls up on a boat, and he tells Clyde like, hey, if I don't return with Ramirez, like, go have a good life. She's like, no, and he's like, don't worry, I'll survive. And of course he will. There's like 3 more episodes of the show left. So we get some Cortan and Ramirez fighting, and then Quentin shows up, and they like all 3 of them are like arguing, and then you see like all the boats with Arak's men showing up, and then the volcano starts to like erupt. It's like super crazy, and at some point Ramirez like honks his head again, it seems, or like Cortan is like, I'm gonna. He's essentially like 6 Ramirez on Quentin and calls him the Highlander, and that causes Ramirez to like kind of remember, and then like the volcano starts exploding and people get knocked around, and it seemed like he hit his head again, but I'm not sure if that was like the intent of like that's why he jogged his memory again. Oh, at some point before all this goes down, Quentin goes back to like the stones and sticks the sword in like Stonehenge and is like calls upon that like monk Jetterer, who's like, come back at the very end and I'll give you the powers once everything's like settled. And so he like has like a giant astral form, and they like talk about like, oh, I need help, Ramirez lost his memories, and the guy's like, he'll don't worry, he'll remember them. And Quentin's like, how? And he's like, you need to figure that out yourself, Highlander, go. And he like nopes out, and then Quentin's like, God, you gotta hate that guy so much. He didn't say that, I say that in my head. This guy's such a douchebag. Like, fuck. Okay, so then Quentin and Ramirez are able to like escape the volcano before it completely erupts, but then Cortan gets caught up in the lava, and then we go ahead a little bit, and Clyde and Gall are like, oh no, we're all alone now, what are we gonna do? And then Quentin rolls up, she's like, yeah, and it's like, where's Ramirez? And he's like, I don't know, he's back there in the lava. And Ramirez is like, no, I'm not, I'm right here. And it's like, hooray. And then we get a parting shot of, as the episode like credits start to roll, of Cortan like breaking out of the lava and standing there on like this tiny little lava island, and it's like, that's not how volcanoes work, but okay. it's like this little patch of like volcanic like obsidian, or I know, like volcanic ground or whatever, that he like breaks through, and he's just standing there alone, like staring off in the distance, and he's like, there could be only one. It's like, okay, Cortan. Episode 25 stars, well, it doesn't star. Our guest appearance Jetterer is Masudo, and he's Japanese. So what do you think he's a Jetterer of? That's right, robots and cybernetics, of course. Oh, goodness. So, pretty cool. So we start off, and there's a ninja who's like attacking Moganda, and he like kills a bunch of hunters, rolls into Cortan's area, and like fights him, and Cortan eventually ends up winning and stabbing this thing, and he's like, oh, it's a cyborg. And in my head I'm like, I don't think that's correct, because and maybe I'm the idiot, I don't know, but my understanding is that a cyborg is someone is like, cybernetics specifically are like man and machine combinations, while robotics is just robots, right? And that's where you get like androids from, right? So these are androids. Like, he's a robotist. He's got the knowledge of robotics. He does have cybernetics as well, as we find out later when we meet him. But so Cortan ships off this dead samurai android, not a cyborg, to Escapolos so that he can like find stuff, and then somewhere inside his like body he finds like an identifier that tells us where the robot came from. Obviously, we find out that Cortan is familiar with Masato, and that they like had battle in the past and experience, and that he knows that he's the master of robotics and cybernetics. So the assumption should have just been like, obviously that's where this came from, because where the fuck else would it come from? But Masato, so meanwhile, Quentin and Ramirez are heading off to Masada, because he lives in like the flat city, or I can't think they call it the flat city. And the flat city is a place where there's lots of earthquakes, and so the whole area has been kind of like devastated with that, and so it's a good place for him to hide, because like, who would suspect to come over here or whatnot? And so they spend some time involving themselves with that. And they get over to the city, they find Masato. Meanwhile, Cortan gets the information, and he heads over to Masada. And so then Quentin and, they have a conversation, and we see a bunch of like little robots that he's created, a little bunch of androids. And then we find out that, and this is some crazy bullshit, but we find out the guy is also the master of cybernetics, because he has a cyborg arm. He has like a metal arm. And, Ramirez is like, what happened there? And he's like, oh, I was fighting Cortan, and he cut my arm off. And I have so many goddamn questions about I have so many questions. So first of all, he's a Jetterer. So Ramirez knew him when they made the Jetterer Oath. And so apparently he did not have that cyborg arm then, but he had it afterwards. But if he did that, that means he fought Cortan after he made the oath, which make him an Oathbreaker, which means Ramirez has to kill him or do something about it, right? So that none of that makes sense. Second of all, he's an immortal, right? As long as he doesn't lose his head, he'll like regenerate. That's like standard immortal canon for everything, including this show. So okay. Anyway, it's kind of like the amnesia thing in the previous episode too. It's kind of like, you know, what causes amnesia? There's like damage in the brain. That he's immortal. I mean, he'll just heal it. Like anytime immortals get shot or stabbed or anything, if it's not like a cut to the head, they heal. Like being an immortal is not just like you don't die, but you maintain all these like injuries, right? It's that you heal these injuries and you heal them very fast. Like there's several times where it's like people are like killed, like car accidents, burned alive, all this stuff, and then they just kind of like roll back out and they look totally fine, right? Including their clothes, Connor McLeod from from Highlander 2. So it's kind of like, all right, whatever. So yeah. It is what it is. So the guy's he'll give the quickening to Quentin, but he has to defeat he has to prove his worth, which is his right. And to do that, he has to fight one of his like robot samurai. So he does, and he beats the shit out of him, and he's like, awesome. And then Masudo drops like a cage on them all, and Ramirez's like, the fuck you doing? He's like, I'm gonna go fight. Cortan's on his way, and I'm gonna fight him. And it's like, you can't fight. And he's like, oh no, I'm not actually fighting him. I created like a super powerful like fighter to like android to fight for me, and here he is, Hero. Hey Hero, say hi to everybody. He's like, yo. And it's like, you can't do that, something breaking your Oathbreaker, something yada yada. So it's like, okay, whatever. So Cortan rolls up and Masato like meets him outside with Hero, and they jaw jack for a little bit, and then Hero and Cortan start fighting, and Hero's like holding his own and doing a good job, and then all of a sudden the earthquakes start, and it's like, ruh-roh, Hero is not designed. It's like, this guy's so retarded. For being so smart, he's fucking retarded. It's like, okay, so I live in Earthquake Palace here, and in Earthquake Palace, there's earthquakes all the time, and I designed a robot to fight Cortan here in my Earthquake Village, but guess what? He's not able to fight if there's like any kind of tremor on the ground whatsoever. So mid-battle, when Hero starts like struggling, Masato has to like reprogram him, but it's like not enough, so Cortan ends up winning, and then he's about to go kill Masato and take his powers when Quentin and Ramirez, who are also, they use the earthquake to like break out of the cage because it like shatters the cage's like integrity, which again, like he lives in like earthquake. Is there always earthquakes? That's like the whole thing. So everything should be like built around that. Anyway. So Quentin rolls out. He starts fighting Cortan. Things are going okay, but Clyde runs back in because Gald got stuck in the cage. And so then it's like the whole place starts like collapsing because the earthquake's like really, really bad right now. So Masudo has to get in his like giant robot from like the end of Aliens and like free the cage, and then the whole place kind of collapses and he hears Clyde scream, and so Quentin gets like distracted, and so Cortan's able to like knock him back, and then he like loses a sword, and then Cortan's like, yes, finally I will cut your head off, even though I literally had you knocked out and I like wanted to go kill you somewhere else one time. So clearly it's not that big of a deal. So he like walks up to him, and then earthquake separates them, and then an earthquake brings him back, and then earthquake separates him again, and then Cortan ends up falling into like the crevasse, and Quentin gets his sword, and everyone's like, great. And so the Masato gives him like the quickening, and they're like, all right, excellent, we won. And then we get like the parting little shot of Cortan climbing back out of the ravine, so he can continue to be a bad guy for the next 2 episodes before this season ends. We start our penultimate episode with the chase through the snow, and we got Clyde's wearing like a very cute little parka looking thing, and everyone else is just wearing same clothes. It's freezing cold. Oh well, whatever. They're racing through the snow away from Arak, and they see like a Eskimo looking dude, and then they fall into the Eskimo looking dude's trap after they're able to escape from Arak and his men. So once they're down there, they try talking to him. Ramirez makes some racist comments about them not understanding language at all, and then they release them, and they talk about how like these people have been here, they've been isolated away from everybody, they're very peaceful, they don't have any desire to do any harm whatsoever, and they're having like a nice little chit chat. Clyde wanders off with Gall, meets like a new friend, and he shows her this ice sculpture that he made of a submarine. Meanwhile, during the meeting, Quentin is like, hey, Ramirez, can I come talk to you like out here for a minute, please? And Ramirez is like, sure, what's up? He's like, hey man, we're still being chased by these guys. I don't want them to find them and like slaughter all these people. That'd be fucked up. So maybe we should go do something about it. Like, yeah, that's a good idea. And then Clyde runs up and is like, look, here's my friend. And then the friend's like, hello. And then Ramirez like sees what they were looking at, like the submarine ice sculpture he made. He's like, wait a second, where's this? And it's like, oh, it's over there, something. And he's like, huh. And so then they get together so Arak's like looking around. He finds like a scarf that Clyde was wearing, which makes him encouraged to like continue looking around this area. Quentin and Ramirez meet with the tribal elders and tell them they need to leave. They're not going to leave. There's some crazy nonsense. They go out and see the hunters. Arak and his men like fell into their trap, and then so they fall into the trap. Quentin and Ramirez hear it, so they run over there. They throw a bunch of bombs, grenades, and blast the whole like cave in. They cave in that whole area where the trap leads to like the rest of the tribe. Like, okay, cool. So now we got to figure out what to do. So they go out. They take the tribesmen out and they warn them. Then they go look and see that Arak and all his men are like pulling the tank out of the hole, and they're gonna keep looking and stuff. And then Ramirez, the guys still don't want to leave. This is their home. So we got to find a way to get rid of the hunters, right? And so the option is Ramirez is like, okay, well, show me the submarine or the great beast and whatever. So they head over there, like great still beast. It's like sleeping and shit, of course. And then they start chatting, and then they get in there, and Ramirez starts like reminiscing, and we get a flashback of him being like a submarine commander in like World War II, I would assume. And they're like blowing up something. Anyway, so back to the present, he's like, I got an idea. Instead of like, we can get the hunters out of here by like, you can lure them out. The igloo people can or the Eskimo people can like do something to make like a pathway to guide you. And then we can blast up the ice floe and like send the hunters on their way, and then we can like escape, and then they'll leave these people alone because they're after you. So they go execute on their plan. Quentin runs and like steals a little tank thing. They have a fun little chase. It rolls over. He fights Arak for a second, and then he like, beats the shit out of him, of course, like he always does. Instead of just like killing him right there on the spot, he runs away again, grabs another tank, races that to somewhere else where like the ice floe is going to blow. Ramirez, on the other hand, is like getting the torpedo set up and ready and doing all his like crazy nonsense. And then once the scheme's all ready to go, he has like, I don't know, 100 seconds. So he runs, gets like a dog sled, picks up Quentin, and then like races out of there. And then Arak's like, the fuck's going on here? And then he like sees the submarine, and he's like, ruh-roh. But too late. So him and his men get caught up on this ice floe thing. They lose like a tank, and they get like pushed out to sea. Good luck, I guess. I don't know how they're going to recover from that, but they do. There's just one more episode. We'll see if it wraps up or just like leaves it in limbo. But for now, the Eskimo people are safe and ready, and then Ramirez, Quentin, and Clyde can, they're going to go out and do more, I don't know, random bullshit. This season has really turned into just like run away, random shit happens, run away, random shit happens, run away, random shit happens. Like, I thought you were supposed to be like training and gathering power and stuff, but like the last like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 of the last like 10 episodes are just like you running away, and it's like, okay, I feel like these people are like running out of ideas. They're just like, we signed up for this many episodes, we got to get it knocked out. All right, the last episode of the Highlander cartoon. Here we are. We have arrived. So this begins with Corton. He has a missile base that he has with like unlimited missiles. It appears like so many fucking missiles, and he launches a missile. And Ramirez, Quentin, and Clyde are like running along the beach. The animation in this episode actually looks better than like the rest of the animation. I guess they had like a budget they just had to blow, so they got more frames in. That's for sure. So they're running. Ramirez sees the missile because Clyde is like, look, it's a shooting star. He's like, get down. It's to get down. The missile blows something up. He's like, come on, we must help the survivors. And then Cortan's like, barrage. And so they barrage missiles all over the place, killing a bunch of people and blasting a bunch of towns and whatnot. And then Arak goes out and like tells everybody that they have 12 hours to bring him a cloud, or Cortan's going to keep bombing everybody and they're all going to die eventually. And so Quentin and Ramirez go to like help people, but then they like throw rocks at him, kick him in other towns. They get like ambushed in a valley and everything. And finally Quentin's like, I got to go take care of Corton. Like I have to do this. Like this, people can't keep dying because of my inactions and such. Like this is partially my fault and whatnot. And so it's like, cool, sounds good. So he runs off. Ramirez and Clyde try to stop him. And eventually Clyde gets jumped by some random dude like in a jungle outside Muganda. He's able to kind of fend him off. And then the guy gets hit in the back of the head with like a rock. Because it's his homies, the Scottish guys, the Dunigans, the Duggans or whatever, right? Like Clyde's people. And so they're like, you were making a big mistake. You can't go fight Corton. So we're never going to get the final battle with Corton. We almost do, but not really. So yeah. We got something Corton. And then time keeps ticking, so they decide they're going to go to the missile base. They go over there, they like break in, they're like punch in, they're like sabotaging the missiles so they'll explode and destroy all of them. And then one of the bureaucrats who's like there like wakes up because they didn't like knock him out good enough, and he runs off to like set off an alarm. And then Quentin and the Dugans have to like fight a bunch of dudes, a bunch of the hunters, and Quentin runs off to like fight Cortan, and the rest of them like escape the base and run away. And the time's still ticking because Cortan told Askepelos to like keep the time going. And then at some point, Askepelos is like, "Oh fuck, they never like fixed this problem. We gotta go." And so they run off, and then Malone runs off, and then it's just Cortan and Quentin on the base, and they have like a fun little sword fight. And then Quentin's about to lose, but then the base like explodes and like blasts them both. And then like Clyde is with Ramirez like watching from a distance, and she's like crying, and he's holding her. And then at some point, Quentin like wakes up and grabs his sword, and he looks over and sees Cortan like lying there, like not dead, obviously, because he's fucking immortal, and with his sword. And he didn't take the sword, he didn't cut the guy's head off, like the most obvious shit possible. And just like, I don't understand, but I guess they were planning on having more seasons. But again, it's like one of those things where it's like, well, if I can't kill him in honorable combat, there's no point in doing this. Like, bro, this guy is he just murdered like all these people at the missile base, and like you're not gonna just like walk over there and cut the dude's fucking head off. Lord, give me strength. So he goes back, and we get some like heroic music because Quentin did the most unheroic thing ever. It's just like the whole thing's like mind-boggling. And then they all ride off into the sunset. And right before Quentin like leaves the missile base, I guess before they all ride off in the sunset, we see like Cortan's hands twitching as if we didn't fucking know he's immortal. And this dude's like been frozen, buried in lava, like all this shit. Like under no circumstances this guy dead. And Quentin shouldn't have just rolled up and like fucking took his head. Like, Jesus Christ, Gabe. Give me strength. Anyway, so that's the end. That's the Immortal cartoon, and that's the end of our Highlander like marathon. It's been a minute, but we covered all the movies except the new one that's coming out, and I'll cover that when that pops up. And then we covered the cartoon, the other cartoon, the web series cartoon, both like all 6 seasons plus Raven. And yeah, that's like all the Highlander stuff I could find. There might be more stuff out there, but as far as I know. So it's been a blast. Thank you for joining me in this journey if you did. And if not, I got more stuff. We're going through Overlord light novel series. I don't know what I'm going to watch next. I'll probably just catch up on some of the anime from the last couple of years that I haven't caught up on, like season 5 or season 6 of Don Machi, the new Konosuba season. I think there's been a season out. There's like the new Farron season that's popping right now. Probably watch that. And then I don't know, some other stuff. The Overlord movie. That yeah. So feel free to keep joining, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.